It's 5 o'clock, and I know we have a lot to discuss with the budget, so let's get started. Director Farman.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. I am pleased to present the 2024 proposed budget this evening. And my main objective just going through this budget is to present any budget highlights and any of the major changes from the 2023 adopted budget to this proposed budget. So we'll begin with the city's largest fund, which is the general fund, and it receives 2/3 of the city's revenues and pays for 47% of its expenditures, so almost half, and most of which is operational, such as public safety and public works. And for 2024, the proposed budget includes a revenue estimate of $12.1 million and planned expenditures of $8.5 million, which is relatively flat compared to 2023. So the resulting ending fund balance in 2024 is estimated at $22.5 million. There is a state ballot question in November, Proposition HH, which will ask the voters to establish certain limits and changes to property tax calculations. We'll talk about that a little bit more later this evening. But the estimated reduction from HH for city property tax revenues is $183,000, which is included in tonight's proposed budget revenue estimate.
Can I ask you a question right there, since you're on that? And you said and it says in here that you've got that added in there for 2024, et cetera, and you carried that through the life of HH. And then if you assume HH passed, because HH then will change, like over the next 3 years and then over the next 10 years. I mean, it keeps changing. And so this budget reflects those changes that are proposed if HH passes.
As we know right now, yes,
Right, yeah,
because it does affect the residential assessment rate, and it changes over the past couple of years. But the largest year-over-year revenue increase in dollars is actually in the sales tax area, and that's $1.4 million increase. And that's because last year when we adopted the budget, we just did not have the 2A ballot approval results, which updated the city's sales tax code. So those were not yet confirmed, so we were pretty conservative in the 2023 adopted budget amount. There are other notable budgeted revenue increases in the general fund: electric utility franchise fees, motor vehicle use taxes, building permits, and interest income. If you look at the largest revenue source in the general fund, again, it's property taxes at $3.7 million, which is 30% of the city of the fund revenues. But citywide property taxes are actually $7.5 million, or 41% of total city revenues. And those revenues are shared with the general fund and the Parks and Recreation Fund. The middle levy is proposed to remain at 14.722 mils for 2024 collection. And other general fund major revenues include retail sales taxes, which is 21% of general fund receipts, and motor vehicle use taxes, which are 13% of the fund revenues. Just to review the local economy a little bit, I had a recent report from the state's chief economist, and he's classifying the state's economic picture as crawling onto firmer ground. There have been some job gains in the state, although at a lower rate now. And most of the remaining inflation is actually from housing costs. So if you were to remove those housing cost increases, there would actually be deflation in the state, which is kind of shocking. But the state does continue to realize a surplus in its general fund, mainly due to business income taxes. Those were up 51% in the state's 2023 fiscal year, which were a major contributor to the state's $3.6 billion TABOR refund. Due to the tremendous revenue growth this year, the state is forecasting a 3.1% decline next year and then back up to 3% average growth over the next 2 years. Nationally, we have many economic headwinds, and a few of the existing risks are persistent inflation, labor force strikes, aggressive monetary tightening by the Fed, increasing oil prices, and deteriorating household finances. So lots to talk about there, but that's just to be brief on a few of those issues. But even with the slowing expansion nationally, the city continues to show resilience in revenues and has stable retail and motor vehicle sales over the last few years, while also maintaining strong building permit activity. That actually concludes my general fund revenue presentation. Are there any questions about the revenues? All right, now we can move on to general fund expenditures. And those are comprised of these major functions on this slide. We have public safety and public works actually combining for 62% of the total fund expenditures. So public safety is at 48% of that. And we will now look at the expenditure budget changes in a little bit more detail. Before we get into those changes, we do have two items that came up after September 19th budget distribution to council, fairly minor, but we do have $10,000 more in American for Disabilities Act changes. We do have some website improvements budgeted, and it's a total of $26,000 now. So there is a law that goes into effect next July and we would have to improve the city's website and also the forms and documents that are accessible on the website. So it's going to be a long transition time, so we'd like to start as soon as possible once the budget is adopted. We do have a second item, and it's an additional $24,480 for salaries and benefits. And this request is based on the compensation study results, which was a recommendation of up to a 6% citywide merit increase. And that is in comparison to a preliminary placeholder amount of 4.5%, which was in the September 19th book. There are really 4 broad highlights in the general fund that are incorporated in this proposed budget. As council is aware, after looking at this budget, it does include a fairly aggressive capital improvement program. And with the volume of projects scheduled for next year, staff still remains confident of completion if all of the design and permit plans move forward without issues. Another major highlight is increased insurance costs, which tend to happen every year. Those are actually budgeted in the administration department, which I'll discuss a little bit more detail in a moment. And another impactful item actually reducing the general fund budget in '24 is a reduced transfer to the capital fund, which was at $439,000 in 2023. And it's at 0 in this proposed budget. Going forward in the forecast, we actually have the general fund now retaining any budget surplus that's forecasted instead of transferring that to the capital fund, which has happened in the more recent history. And then we have one more item that actually reduces the budget in '24 compared to last year or this year, and that is during the 2022 audit, there was a determination that there's actually some money left over from those 2017 certificates of participation that funded public facility projects. So there's $514,000, and we're proposing to use those over the next 2 years and offset the general fund portion of the COP's debt service. So those funds are actually restricted to be used either on public facilities or can be spent on debt service. Here is some more specific departmental information highlights. The administration department includes finance, sales tax, city clerk, human resources, the city manager, municipal court, the village crier, and information technology functions for the city. The health insurance and non-sworn retirement are also centrally budgeted in this department. So council can see those total amounts of budget for those insurance costs. Primary budget increases outside of compensation include $37,000 for property and liability insurance, $126,000 for health insurance, $25,000 for county fees that are associated with motor vehicle use tax, and then the increased property tax collections. And then I mentioned the $26,000 ADA compliance. So those estimates include actual rates that we now have from CIRSA, which is our insurance carrier, and property and liability insurance are rising because of industry-wide liability claims from natural disasters and also from police liability. So those aren't increasing premiums on the city's actual premiums. Those are industry-wide costs that have gone up.
And the question on that, Doug, is, and you said 31%, and in your revised, drivers, your major assumptions in drivers, you actually show 26% for 2024, but then you flatten it out to 8% going forward for the remaining 10 years. So is it, you think that you're just going to have a one-time jump, or, I guess that is what you're going to assume?
Yeah, it's that's what we speculate would be the average increase. I'm really not sure what the short term may do.
Right.
But you're right, it definitely could be higher over the next couple of years. It seems like we have more and more natural disasters every year, and that obviously affects the insurance industry.
Right. And the reason I was asking that, and it's more just as well for my fellow council members, the point is my view is as we go through this, obviously the budget for this year, but then looking long range, what are the things that could jump up in the future that would not be, you couldn't call them unforeseeable? And I think that's an important thing that we all focus on, which is what could reasonably change going forward, so.
No, that's a great comment, and on the flip side, our health premiums usually come under what we've estimated, but we usually try to leave a little bit of cushion there as well, and we still don't know what the health insurance premiums will be this year, but good comment, I appreciate it. Our other department on the slide is community development, and that proposed budget is rising to adjust for plan review services. This year, there were actually a lot of single-family building permits issued, and our volume continues to be high. So we had estimated the permit volume to go down in '23, which did not occur, and we actually are forecasting that permit volume to stay the same and just not have the type of single-family permits next year. So there's a $40,000 increase to adjust those plan review services back to more historical levels. In looking at the public safety department, they've got quite a few budget highlights. As council is aware, there's a Kent Denver school contract now, so there's an additional officer. It's a school resource officer, and those costs are fully reimbursed by the school. There are also some funds for police pension or FPPA migration, and council will review a resolution actually at the next meeting to consider that participation, but this would include the budget, the funding authority in the budget for next year. And in 2023, the city's flock camera, those license plate readers, were actually in a pilot program, and those subscriptions will now be paid for by the city next year, and that's $37,500. And next year also, the police department do plan to pursue law enforcement accreditation, so there's a cost to that as well. And then on the capital side, the police are due to have 3 vehicles replaced next year, and that matches the '23 total, but obviously the costs have gone up a little bit between '23 and '24. And they also plan on replacing their TASER equipment, and that is in the capital fund as well. It tends to have a 5-year life cycle, and the police would like to, I think that's a total replacement of their TASERs, so just do it all at once rather than trying to phase it in and have the technology just keep getting behind the curve. And then lastly, staff is recommending eliminating the city's requirement for annual security alarm permits and fees. The city would like to incentivize individuals to obtain those permits rather than have them not set their alarms. So council will actually be reviewing a resolution in November, I believe, to review those fees. And that amount is about $34,000 annually to the city's general fund.
By the way, I thought that was I saw that added in there. I thought that was a great idea. But that's obviously, once we go forward with it, that's something that we want to communicate to broadly and make sure everybody understands that that's something that was proposed by the chief, and we did. So,
Chief will have it on his front page, I'm sure. So in 2024, the Public Works Department has a few highlights. They are going to initiate a vehicle tracking system, and that is planned to communicate to the community where snowplows and sweepers are on the streets. So they can tell when they will actually have a timetable, I think, an estimate when they will get to their street. And then obviously a major highlight for Public Works is they will be managing all of those capital improvement program projects. So they're going to be busy next year. That concludes the general fund expenditures. Are there any further questions about the general fund at this point?
appear to be.
All right, thank you. We can turn now to the city's capital fund. So we did talk about the police department equipment replacement, and Public Works is also planning on some infrastructure projects, which includes their annual street projects, which is chip seal and concrete programs. They also do hard surface trail improvements. And there is another improvement project, which is the traffic island removal at Cherry Hills Farm Drive and Bellevue. It was actually in the 23 budget as well, and I think they're still going to try to get that project completed this year, but it is in the budget proposed for next year, just in case that doesn't occur this year. And that would be equally shared in the funding with the homeowner association.
Let me ask a question on that. When I saw the proposals, there was extremely wide variation of the cost on that. Has that been decided yet? Have you guys worked on that, Jay?
We're in the process of doing that this week. We'll be vetting those bids to make sure the low bid has everything included. If it does and their references come back good, we may be able to go with that. If there's some things missing, we'll move on to the next bid, which is about $50,000 more.
Thank you. We also have some vehicle replacements. I guess vehicles as in dump trucks, but there are 2 that are planned to be replaced next year, along with the Public Works pickup. And they also have a culvert jetter to clear city main culverts in the proposed budget. Those vehicle costs should actually be reduced a little bit once they know what the value is of their vehicle trade-ins. And then in the administration department here in the capital fund, there is an 8-year-old computer server that needs to be replaced next year. And along with taking a look at restructuring the dais format and structure here in the council chambers. In the Parks and Recreation capital budget, there are 1.185 expenditures in the proposed budget. And we can take a look at those items a little bit closer. There's a Toolcat utility machine replacement along with a salt spreader. And then we have some Quincy Farm improvements that are planned for next year. The farm barn would be refurbished at, I think there's a more recent cost estimate of $760,000, and that would be in partnership with the Land Preserve. Ideally, they would contribute $150,000, so that is also in the budget as an offset to that cost, bringing the city's share down to $610,000. At the farm, there's also a pond that needs dredged and a footbridge that needs to be replaced. And other parks-related projects include Tufts Bridge at Little Dry Creek. That would be a joint project with the Mile High Flood District. And there is John Mead Park regrading and wetlands work, and also a sidewalk gap study in the proposed budget. And lastly, the city received, I think council probably remembers, they received $25,000 that was actually refunded when the Broncos team sold. The stadium district sales taxes needed to be refunded back to the municipality. So the city got $25,000, and that's actually restricted for parks or recreation programs. So right now we have it in the planned budget to replace play rocks at Dahlia Park. And so we do have that at $25,000 in this budget. As you will notice, we have Parks and Recreation at $1.28 million. There was a late adjustment to that total cost on the barn. So in actuality, it's $1.28 million in the budget, but the transfer is at $1.185 million right now. And if council remembers, we only transfer the actual funds spent to reimburse the capital fund. So whatever the parks purchases are for the year, we'll do that at year end. Just transfer the actual amount. And then in the American Rescue Plan Act fund, which is 1.3 million, those are required to be obligated in 2024 and are required to be used on general governmental services, which can include capital assets. So we do have 4 projects in the planned budget. We have 2 EV vehicles, electric vehicles for the Public Works. And then we have EV charging stations in the budget, along with Highline Canal improvements and Public Works building improvements. So right now, that is proposed to be funded by the ARPA funds.
Is the electrical vehicle charging stations, is that at the facility over on Quincy?
That
So-
would be for police.
For the police, okay.
And then the ending result would be 9.35 million projected ending fund balance for the capital fund. The city does have another major operating fund, which is the Parks and Recreation Fund. Those budget highlights include some items that we've already talked about, the property tax increase. And the parks actually has the same number of employees that we're planning on for next year. That's 8 full-time and 5 seasonal employees. So they incur some of the similar insurance increases for property liability and also for health insurance for those employee coverages. And then one additional highlight for the Parks Fund, they plan to repair and replace park and trail signs while also redesigning and printing new trail maps. And looking at some of the other city funds, the Conservation Trust Fund, which of course is restricted because it has state lottery proceeds that are allocated based on population. So those funds can be spent on capital acquisition, improvements, or maintenance of recreational public sites. So the city uses these funds for asphalt trail maintenance, overseeding, and restoration of bridle trails and split rail fence. So that is a budget of $64,500 next year. And then the city's Arapahoe County open space uses the county's 0.25% sales tax, and that's allocated to the city. So that is restricted to fund acquisition of new parks or open spaces, as well as improvements to existing parks and trail networks. The city typically uses those funds on trail repairs and improvements, which are planned in 2024. We do plan on extending existing irrigation along the Highline Canal, and also to plant some additional trees there along the canal. And then some of these open space funds actually will supplement the stadium district funds I talked about for the Dahlia Park Play Rocks. And that leaves the open space fund with 1.5 million fund balance.
So can I ask a question? So I see trail improvements in the Conservation Fund and the Arapahoe County Open Space and Parks and Recreation, and I think maybe there was also some in the Capital Fund. How do you decide? I mean, first of all, what's the total amount of trail improvements and parks improvements?
Yeah, I can let Emily take a look at it, but I think we try to use the restricted funds first if they qualify, but we do have to make sure they qualify
Okay.
before we use city funds.
So, for example, Arapahoe County Open Space doesn't like us to use anything on what they would call a sidewalk. So we call it a trail, even though it's in a state right-of-way. They don't want us to use those funds for concrete repair of those sidewalks, those type of things. So depending on restrictions, that's how we decide which project goes where.
So what's the total amount we're spending on trail improvements?
I don't have that off the top of my head.
If we're just talking about surfacing, we have 75,000 for the hard surface trails, 35,000 for the soft surface trails, and then depending on how you're counting, about $56,500 in the Conservation Trust Fund for trails.
It's about 165,000.
156 $6,000.
And that's just
We typically don't.
maintaining the trails?
Yes, we typically don't spend that entire amount. Those are all pretty, besides the 75,000 for the hard surface sections that we're addressing next year. That 75,000 is specific for areas that, that's not regular maintenance, I guess, is the best way to say it. So it's areas like in front of Kent Denver where the trees are starting to create, they're starting to heave the trail. So that's going in and is sort of a special project. The other budgeted amounts are pretty standard year over year, and we don't typically spend the full amount.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that question. We have just a couple more funds to cover here. The Catherine Anderson Land Donation Fund has a proposed budget of $213,120. That proposed budget includes $74,500 for Quincy Farm maintenance and operations, and then $122,000 toward the Land Preserve Annual Plan, and then we have $16,620 in other costs. Then the city does have a water and sewer fund, which accounts for revenues and expenditures related to consolidation of water and sewer utilities within the city's responsibility. And actually, that gets to be pretty complicated. But there are some sewer line repairs that we have planned for next year, which is the Martin Lane project that was also budgeted this year. We do have that planned for sewer line repairs next year. And this is a proprietary fund, which is like a business type fund. So we actually have, instead of fund balance, we actually have net position for the water sewer fund, and that is at $818,000. So that includes a small amount of capital assets at $36,000. We also have, we're going to be budgeting $333,900 for that planned debt service for the COP fund. And then here are the 4 ARPA funds. So this is, or for ARPA projects. This is the $1.3 million that would be budgeted out of the ARPA fund for the city. That concludes this presentation of the 24 plan budget. We have the first reading and public hearing and mill levy on November 7th, and then the second reading would be scheduled for December 6th. That's the timetable.
Okay, thank you very much for that presentation. I think we were sort of talking about what the most effective way to have this discussion would be. And I think what we've decided is that rather than just kind of going down and let everybody give your thoughts, we'll go department by department, and then we'll add the capital fund projects as a, you know, it's not a department, but so we can start, that way each person we can try to keep the conversation around a topic, one topic at a time. So we can start with administration. Who's the administration liaison?
Mr. Holland.
Okay. So do people have questions about the administration budget? No. Great, okay. Judicial budget, do we have a judicial person? Is that?
I think that's still part of administration.
That's, okay. I did just have one quick question about, it's not an enormous number, but it's a 20% increase. Is that due to the laws around?
That's a great question. I probably should have covered this, but we are moving the part-time judge's salary that was actually up in the administration division down to municipal court because we believe that's more of a municipal court function. I'm not sure why historically it was up in the administration, but Jim and I thought it would just be better classified under municipal court, but okay. No increase in cost, just reclassification.
Recategorization. Okay, thank you. The information technology budget. Any questions? Community development? Are you thinking, Dan, are you thinking maybe? Okay. Okay. So yeah, we'll go to those separately. The crier, I doubt anybody has any. Although I have to confess that without lines, I was looking at the $45,000 number with public safety, and I kept thinking that can't be right. I was sort of following it across. I was getting myself very confused. Public safety. Does anybody have any questions about our public safety budget?
I just have one, Chief. I too, as Commissioner Councilman Holen suggested, I too like the idea of not charging for the alarm license. But I do just wonder a little bit. I know we're going to talk about it maybe at the November meeting. Is that what I heard Doug say? Do we have any reason to believe that that's actually going to motivate people to start setting their alarms if they don't have to pay the fee? I just want to make sure there's a correlation there so that we're not giving up $30,000 or $35,000 worth of revenue.
Yeah, great question. So the quick analysis, there's two things that you'll find on that resolution specific. Well, there's a few things, but two primary things. One is that we charge a fee to permit someone to have a residential alarm. However, once we collect that permitting fee, we have no relationship in that equation whatsoever. That is between the homeowner and their alarm company. So there is no responsibility that the city has beyond collecting the fee for the permit. We don't do anything with that permit other than issue it and sort of just make a note of it. The second, and perhaps the bigger issue, is that our code currently requires or has a fine schedule for false alarms. It also indicates that we're going to quit coming to your house after your third one. We're not. Right, and so the code needs some updating to meet our business practice. And one thing that I'm concerned about is, as you are well aware, over the last few months in particular, out of one side of my mouth, I talk about how important it is to set your alarm. This other side of my mouth, I'm telling you, but you have to pay us to do that. And so I want to make sure that our messaging is clear and concise and that reflects the priorities of this council. To answer your question more anecdotally, is
that's an annual fee, correct?
So we permit January each year. We send out the notices, and then people that renew their permits pay that fee. Not everybody that has an alarm permits it. We know that, and we've certainly have heard over the course of the last several months. We've come into contact with more than a handful of people who have indicated that they simply don't set their alarms because they know they've met the maximum false alarms they can have before we start charging them a penalty. We've had one family, I spoke to her in particular, and she said, my teenagers set up my alarm every night when they come home. And I know they just are forgetful. They're not thinking about the alarm code. You guys have been out to my house many times, so I don't set it anymore. Well, we certainly don't want that to be the case either. So we are working, legal and myself are working out the language around that resolution to make sure that we're capitalizing on the optic and what we want to relay to our residents. And certainly, and for what it's worth, and I don't think we have the numbers, but when we do the fine collection, for lack of a better word, for the false alarms, there's only about 20% of the people who we bill actually pay those alarms back. And then we turn around after 2 years and we wipe their slate clean. So it's just not functionally what we're trying to achieve. Okay. We really want to push crime prevention and not a money grab.
Yeah, I don't know that telling them that they don't need to pay a alarm fee anymore a license or permitting fee is going to change their habits, but I do agree that it will get our messaging clear that set your alarm and no, we are not going to charge you to set your alarm essentially. So I think that's a good idea. That was my only question on public safety.
I actually had a question about, I know we've gone through a lot of work. We've added additional school resource officers. And over the course of that conversation and in conversations with other communities, I learned that we are pretty much the only jurisdiction that provides school resource officers at no charge. Greenwood Village is paid for their school resource officers. Aurora is paid by Cherry Creek School District for their resource officers. And I guess I'm wondering, I think it's wonderful that we have had this commitment to safety for our children. But I am wondering what the price tag of that is, and particularly now that 2 out of the 3 schools in the city are paying for that service. Is that something that a dialogue we might need to have with Cherry Creek School District as well? They're certainly accustomed to paying for that service from other providers.
Are you referring specifically to the elementary school?
Yes.
Okay. So it's a great point. I was surprised to see that too. As you might remember, just 1.5 years ago, we actually provided a city-funded school resource officer to be split amongst the 3 schools, and that was surprising, to say the least. I've seen it where school districts pay for the entire cost, or that there's a cost share between the local law enforcement agency and the school district. We weren't doing any of those. So in terms of the St. Mary's and Kent, they now pay 100% of the cost for a school resource officer. And we're quite pleased with that. The elementary school does not have a dedicated school resource officer. We have, as a result of our relationship with Kent and St. Mary's, we ended up creating an additional position. Essentially, that previously funded school resource officer was brought back into operations and made into our community partnership position. So the city realizes nearly the entire benefit of that position. At the same time, we didn't want to take away a sense of security from the elementary school. So they, in their uncommitted time, will frequently visit the school, but we're under no contractual obligation with the elementary school or the school district for that.
Okay. And to be clear, just if anybody's watching, the Cherry Creek School District does make a donation, or at least they did this year. I think they've traditionally done it, of $10,000, I believe it was. So while it isn't a contractual, payment for services, it is an acknowledgement of the benefit we're providing. But I just was wondering whether that was something we might need to consider just out of fairness in our community.
Mayor, who would contact the schools and discuss that with them? Is that something the chief does, or something?
Well, considering that we don't actually have a contractual school resource officer. So the other thing to note, I think, that I learned is that most elementary schools don't actually have school resource officers. They are provided, they're contracted, like at West Middle School in Greenwood Village and Cherry Creek High School. And then the high schools in Aurora and the middle schools in Aurora as well are contracted. And so those are sort of formal relationships, but I don't think Cherry Creek Schools does that for all the elementary schools. So I'm not sure who you would talk to or.
Well, so I think you make an excellent point. One is to acknowledge what you said, that the elementary school is the only elementary school in the district that has any law enforcement presence on a regular basis. However, having said that, it was structured as such that we had no contractual obligation to be there. So if staffing were low, or we had to pull that officer away from the school for even the third of the day that they might visit that school, the city realizes the benefit. We're essentially, we recognize the school as a strategic partner in our community, and as we sort of outline our responsibility to protect the most vulnerable, we spend some time over there occasionally. So I do want to make it clear that there is no contractual obligation, nor would I want to go down that road, because now all of a sudden, if that officer is out sick or on vacation or in training, we have to take a patrol officer off the road contractually to go and spend time at the elementary school. I think the situation we have is the most feasible that we could enter into.
And I suspect then the reality is that Cherry Creek School District wouldn't be able to do that because they don't do it for all the other schools. So if we wanted to go that road, that would probably be the end of that, and I don't think anybody wants that. I think I don't know what the percentage is, but it's got to be 80% of the students there are Cherry Hills residents, at least I would think. Okay, so that's public safety.
I had,
Oh, yeah.
I had another
Another one?
public safety. And going through and I don't know, we got a lot of different iterations of this information, but I'm looking at the original binder we were given. There's kind of a line item portion of it. It's building maintenance went from 12,000 this year to 2380, so doubled almost for next year. And I didn't understand in the description, is this all new in the description next to it? Because in other sections, then it looked like what was new was in red. And so I'm asking
What
why.
page are you on, Susan?
I'm on page 64
4.
of the original binder.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, actually, the budget does not change from 23 to 24, and you're right, we tried to put in the new items in red. But that would be just for contingency if there was something extraordinary for building maintenance that we needed to spend that money on. But you can see
So it doubled
historically
for a
that has been.
contingency? It doubled for a contingency? Because you have 2023 year-end estimate of 12,000 and 24 budget request of 23,860, so almost double.
Yeah, the 23 ask was the same amount. The year-end estimate is what we intended, what we're likely to have spent. But if you look over a few columns, you'll
Oh, I
see
see.
that the 23 ask was the same as the 24 ask. There's no difference there.
Okay, I understand that. But in 21, we spent 13,000, 22, we spent 9,000 last year, or this year, 12,000. Why do,
How do you think we run surpluses?
Well, but we always.
Oh, I shouldn't say that.
I mean,
But as our buildings age, we continue to put more of a slough in there. We don't know if we're going to lose a rooftop unit. We always try to keep enough money in our building maintenance. If something happens, we don't have to go into an emergency fund or come to council. So
okay,
the ask is the same of the 23,000. We have only spent 12 of, or will only spend 12 this year.
okay.
All right, and then I guess the last question I have as it relates to public safety, I hope it goes without saying, but just in case it doesn't. Obviously, this is an area that is incredibly important to the operation of our city and to the residents of our city. And I think our council, at least the years that I've been on it, has prided ourselves in meeting the needs of our police department. And so I'm assuming, since you developed this budget with everyone, that you feel confident that this is the money you need to do the job effectively.
Thank you for that question. It does reflect what I think the needs of the organization are for this next budget year, certainly. And for what it's worth, I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge how grateful the police department is to the city council for making public safety a priority. It appears to me that that's historically been the case, and I know the residents recognize that and appreciate it. There are some equipment improvements, some technology improvements as a way to leverage working smarter rather than harder in a lot of areas, since we don't have an enormous staff. But every metric that is used to determine staffing needs in particular has been met, and I feel confident that this budget propels us toward our goals.
Perfect, thank you so much. Okay.
And
Any
before we move on, I just
Yep,
want to
yep.
make sure that these are just questions on public safety operating budget, not the capital budget. 'Cause I
Correct,
will have
we're
some
just talking
questions
the
on
operating
public
budget.
safety
Yeah,
on
we're
that.
going to go to capital.
Okay, good.
Okay. Public Works operating, not capital. Any questions there? Okay. Then let's dive in then to the capital budget. Dan, I think some of your items, questions you had fall here. Do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, Mayor, I'm not sure that they do actually fall into this category. I've got, well, I guess Highline, is the ARPA Highline Canal 650?
That's in capital, right? Yes, so,
Okay.
yes.
I just want to make sure I understand the use of those ARPA funds. Jay or Doug, they have to be used in '24, is that right?
They have to be appropriated by 24, used
By
by,
'24?
Yes,
So by the end
just
of this calendar year, appropriated?
Correct.
Used by the end of next year?
by the, no, they need to be appropriated in 24, not this year, not 23. Appropriated by the end of 24, used by the end of 26.
That's
Okay.
right, 2026.
Okay, I think that's fine. I was just wanting to make sure if we're planning a Highline Canal embankment project, not the Benway Weir, whatever.
Storm sewer, yeah.
No, it's not storm.
It's the Blackmere Common over.
Blackmore Common
Yeah,
spillway.
the Blackmore
Yeah.
spillway.
Yep.
I think we talked about this maybe 6 months ago. We just need to make sure that we're working on the permitting it's gonna take to get that permitted, because that could take a while, right?
Well, what's really holding us up is where the ownership of the canal is going to be.
Right.
The permitting, we're pretty clear on how we have to do that and can move that forward.
Okay,
But we just don't want to make any investments if we
Okay.
don't know where the ownership lies.
all right, that's all I had on
But
that.
maybe you can talk about that, because I've got specific questions too. But one of the things on the capital improvement program, it changed a fair amount from when I went over it with you two guys. Okay, and so one of the things, and so the question is, do you feel, other than special projects, for instance, such as the cellular communication, but other than the things that we know, the money is all in there through 2033? Because prior to that, there wasn't an 860 on Quincy Farms for 2024, but I think it was like 370 or something running out every other year or something like that. On stormwater, capital improvements to the Highline Canal, that was run out, I don't know, 250 or something like that through the whole period of time. Now there's just 500,000 for 2025. There's 860 for Quincy Farms, nothing there. And I sit back and I go, okay, really? Is that really what we're thinking is going to be needed? So my question coming back is does the capital improvement program, based on everything that this council, that we know is coming, does it reflect your thinking?
You're talking specifically the long range now.
Yeah, well, the capital improvement program, your page A, which on all of those numbers do foot, they all flow into the long-range financial plan, and I've checked that out, they all do. So it's, total expenditures all flow into that, but there's not a lot of total expenditures in there. I mean, you're basically looking 2027 on, it's 1.5 million a year. That's it. In the again, and we talked about this, the capital improvement program, the CIP, which we just got, in fact, we're going to approve that tonight. I mean, that's the thing that we use to plan. That's the thing that we sit back and say, this is what we are anticipating and thinking is going to be coming. Nothing's been, budgeted or allocated. It's a year-by-year basis, but that's what we think.
Yes, and we try to look out as far as we can with those. Quincy Farm has been one of the toughest ones for this staff. We get nobody tells us what direction we're going to go. We start a master plan and it gets ended. We've been putting numbers into that for years and they don't mean anything until we have a plan together. So I would say no, there's certain things that we have not put in this long-range budget that we need a lot more direction on. So this is our best guess knowing what we know right now, long range, but there's a few things in there that we won't know until we have some more information and some more buy-in from everybody as to where we are going with certain projects long-term.
Okay.
And let me just add, this is our best guess at 10 years. Obviously, there's going to be other capital improvement program projects that are going to come up in the next 10 years. You can probably look at this budget and say, we didn't anticipate some of those things being done 10 years ago. And so things get added over time. We don't always have that great crystal ball for 10 years out, but we probably have for the next couple of years. It's getting a lot more crystallized, and then it gets a little blurry as time goes by.
No, and I get that, and I appreciate that. But again, like, for instance, the Highline Canal, when we went over it a month ago or whatever it was, there was 500 and 650. Now it's just 500. It's a lot of money to just go poof, okay? And the thrust is that, and things do change, et cetera, et cetera. But like I said, this thing all flows into the long-range financial plan, and I take this and I look at it and I go, and again, I don't know if you guys did that, but I mean, you know,
Well, and
2033, the total of our three major funds is $51 million. I mean, it's a lot of money.
Well,
And so I sit there and go, okay, I'm going to start making decisions based on that money. I just want to make sure that there's not things in there. And you're answering it. You're saying, hey, we don't think that there's anything in there that, although you are saying, hey, we need more direction on Quincy Farms, but other than Quincy Farms, we're
well,
not
and
getting
then,
a lot of
you know,
direction.
we still have all the master plan projects with no numbers on them. In the orange, we've got undergrounding, fiber, trail connections. So there's a lot in here that hasn't been moved out because we, like Jim said, it gets a little foggy farther out there. But for the next few years, we're pretty crystal clear on the projects that we have on our slate.
Well, I guess it raises a question with me, Earl. If we have some things that we know are going to happen, I mean, we will continue to own Quincy Farm, and there will continue to be some expenses, and other projects are in that same realm. Would we be better served by putting at least an order of magnitude placeholder in there so that we get a number that's a little more, when we look at the long-range plan, a little more representative of what reality might be? I mean, it's not going to come in that way. We know that, but you know, some of these known larger expenses, even if we don't have them quantified at the moment, I think a rough estimate might be helpful.
Well, I think we would put those in there if we knew that they were actually going to be projects we're going to be doing. And I think we haven't even decided that yet. I mean, we can always throw in numbers on projects that we think might happen, but then that's not really a good way to go about budgeting either. If they're known quantities that, for example, we need to buy a new grader in 8 years and that's going to cost $500,000, we'll put that in the budget and put our best estimate to it. Sure. But if we're going to fix up all the trees along the High Line and we don't have any consensus that that's really what we want to spend our money on, we may not put that in our budget.
Well, now,
Should there be a footnote that says, here are projects that have been discussed that are not yet quantified, so that we at least, in looking at things, can know, you know, undergrounding or.
Well, so they are in the orange, down here at the bottom.
and this may be a good time for me to just throw out there, I very much would like.
I mean, I agree. That's what you're saying right there. I mean, somewhere along the line, and councils, each one can do it, is like, I'd like to see undergrounding go the hell off there. I mean, it's never going to happen.
Not $1 million a mile.
Right. I mean, it's just not going to. I mean, I just don't think we'd ever do that. The question is what are the projects that are discussed? Like cellular, we know that
For
that's
example,
For example.
For
which
example.
I've been waiting to chime in here.
Well, and yeah, I was
So,
just warming you up. but,
I would like to suggest, and you heard me talk about this at our last meeting, I'd like to suggest that we go ahead and budget now for 2024. And I don't know exactly if it gets spent in 2024 or if it trickles into 2025, but I'd like to go ahead and get a consensus amongst council now that this cell phone coverage project, where we're talking about antennas, and we don't know which plan of antennas we're gonna take to our citizens and discuss with the community or talk amongst ourselves and vote on. And we don't know exactly what the infrastructure requirements are, but we have a pretty good idea. The consultant that we've been working with for the last 6 or 9 months has given us, you know, a pretty good idea about where we are right now. I'd like to go ahead and get a $2.5 million budget, the number that you said we should cap it not more than 2.5. You were right. I was wrong. I thought it was going to come in much higher than that. And I was pleasantly surprised when H.R. Green, our consultant, came in and said, here's the 3 different plans we're looking at, add in some contingency into each one, and this is for both the vertical infrastructure as well as the horizontal, meaning the fiber lines, and all the other associated stuff that goes with it. The most expensive plan that we think is out there right now is about $2.2 million. And I would like to ask council to consider dropping in a $2.5 million budget, give us a little bit of cushion on top of that. Yes, it had a little contingency already in there, but we all know that things end up costing more than you budget for anyway. But I think we should add that in now for 2024, and maybe it gets bumped into 2025 next year when we're working on the budget. We amend it and kick that into 2025. But I think now's the time to do that. I think we're all committed to actually acting on the study that we've engaged, right? That's the plan. That's the reason we engaged the study. And I, for one, am sold that it's time to do it. It's our citizens deserve better coverage than what we have now. So,
Yeah, I guess my thing on that is first of all, I think that's something that I think council, my sense is council is committed to that too. But I do think that we probably ought to weigh in and say, yeah, we can get it, we can solve our cellular phone for $2.5 million. That's something I can get behind. And so you don't have to ask me, I'm telling you, I can get behind that. I don't know that it should go in 2024 though. I think it probably should go in 2025. The reason is we now know, the good news is we're going to be able to solve our cellular problem. And we're going to be able to solve it for $2.5 million or under. In my personal opinion, I think that means that it's a viable option. But I can't imagine putting up 70-foot or 100-foot towers without going to a vote to the people. Now, there's been some discussion, and the mayor had an idea that maybe we would do that and literally go door to door, and it's not an official vote, but it's a canvassing. Yeah, we could always go for a special election. My guess is we probably wouldn't do that. We'd probably just do it in November, which then probably said it's probably in 2025. And I'd be all favor of putting it in 2025. But, which means that it's in there. I mean, it's in there.
Dan, let me ask a question.
Wait, sorry, Randy was about to say something.
Oh, go ahead.
I have to say, I was equally pleased that the numbers were not, unreachable in terms of making some progress. There are still loose ends, right? Can we get the carriers on board, and will the public be okay with tall towers, those sorts of things? But I don't have a problem, particularly with the long-range plan, kind of putting that in, again, placeholder. If we decide that for whatever reason we don't want to do it, we don't have to spend the money.
Right.
It's not, but I think to give ourselves a more realistic view of the long haul and where we stand, it feels like that's kind of a high probable, that something's going to be happening there. And I have to say too, I have the same feeling about Quincy Farm because, we've had presentation after presentation about all the things that need to be done over time. And, we can go back, totals of 5 million, whatever. It seems to me that we're kind of running a risk of misleading ourselves by not putting a placeholder, not committing the money, but putting a placeholder as we look out, 4 or 5 years to again, we don't have to spend it if it doesn't look like it's prudent when we get down in the weeds. But when we're looking at long-range plans, got to get a sense of what's more realistic,
Yeah. Alan?
Yeah, and this is an issue, and it goes back 12 years ago when I was on Planning Commission. Every meeting it came up, the necessity of doing this. So my question is twofold. One, Randy raised the issue of do we have the people that are going to service it?
Carriers.
The carriers. Number two is timing. I think sooner rather than later, as far as I'm concerned. If we've got through these hoops that we have the carriers on board and can schedule it and whatever, and I didn't know what the restrictions are on the 70-foot or 100-foot, whatever those are. But I'm totally in favor of it, and I would budget it now, going forward, giving us the impetus to pursue it, because I think we do need to pursue it. It's been on the books. It's been on agendas for 10, 12 years now. So my question really is the timing on that, carriers and ability to do that.
So the carriers issue, we're putting out an RFP essentially now for 6 weeks from now to get feedback from the carriers and hopefully, more importantly, in my mind, the neutral host providers. That's the Crown Castles. And the hope, when I say we hope it's the neutral host carriers, is I don't think we want to be the direct landlords to T-Mobile and Verizon and AT&T. I think we'd rather have Crown Castle or one of the other ones like that, the neutral host carriers, be our tenant, and let them go deal directly with the carriers. That's the much simpler way on that graph that we all looked at several months ago about we can either be the cell phone provider and do the billing for cell phone coverage. That's the extreme one end. And the other end is we do nothing and let the entire public sector do it. What we're talking about is a little bit of a hybrid. We get a neutral host provider. They'll go out and secure the carriers. So I'm hoping that we get those neutral host providers who come in with this RFP and say, yes, we want to be in on this. If you're going to fund some of the horizontal and vertical infrastructure, we'll bring our equipment to those towers, and we will bring the carriers to hook up to our equipment, and off we go. We've got some cell coverage. I do want to make one more kind of general comment, though. I want to be abundantly clear for the record and for anyone who's watching or listening. This to me is I want to make it clear that we're not going down the same path as we may have gone down 6 or 7 years ago when we had a roundabout discussion. For those of you who are laughing, you'll remember what we're talking about. But we sat here and did the same thing in the other building, but we talked about how we were going to allocate some money to go fix what we thought was a city problem, a problem we thought the citizens were asking us to fix. And we decided to allocate some money towards it, and then our world blew up on us because the citizens, we apparently did not gauge properly what the citizens wanted, and the citizens came to us and said, we absolutely do not want a roundabout at Quincy and Colorado Boulevard at the entrance to Kent Denver. And that was on us. We jumped the gun, although we never voted to actually build those improvements. We voted just to allocate some money and have it there in case we had good, positive community meetings. I want to make it clear we are doing the same thing here. We're only talking about allocating some money for a future project if everything falls together, including community outreach.
But it actually was an allocation. I mean, in other words, if we sat back and said, put 2.5 million in 2025 or 2024, although 2024 gets a little light, that's not the same thing as the allocation that we made. I mean, that's,
Budget
and by the way, to anybody that's listening, the reason we did that was specifically to do everything we could to accommodate Kent Denver. We wanted, if we hadn't done that, it would have pushed us and all the construction wouldn't have been done in time for the start of their school year. And that's why we did it, and you're absolutely right. But we come back to, let's put that word allocation out of there for the time being. The question is what do we put in our plan and when do we put it in? And again, my view, and I'd even be willing to say, hey, put in 2.75, but in 2025, because there's no way we're going to do it in 2024. We can't get it all done. It wouldn't happen. And I don't think that it's a, well, let's put it in there anyway, because that'll keep the heat under us. The heat's under us. It's a question of trying to develop these long-range financial plans, and I know you guys probably get sick of me when I harp on this, the best we can. What do we think we're going to do, and let's put it in there. Hence my conversation, my questions to Jay, and do you have what you know in here? Because I look at this, and we're all looking at this, and we're going to try to figure out what we're going to do when.
Is this an argument, though, perhaps to put some in 2024 and some in 2025?
I might kick it and maybe hear from Jay. What do you think about this current schedule that we're working with the consultant right now? When would be the earliest if we threw in there a couple of months of community outreach?
I think that's what it all revolves around is the community outreach. If all went as planned, and a neutral carrier could find the providers and say, yeah, we're all in, I think mid to late next year, we could be under construction.
I do too. And so Earl, I'm sorry, but I'm going to respectfully disagree. I think this still could be a 2024 construction job, or at least starting in 2024. I guess my question for you and for council and for Doug, is there a downside to allocating this money or budgeting for this expense in 2024 if it gets kicked into 2025? What's the downside?
I think as far as budgeting, there is no downside. Allocations where we got in trouble last time. And I think if we budget it, and Jay, what you're saying, it is feasible, and we know these hoops have to be jumped through, and I'm 100% behind it if we can jump through these hoops, and we ought to pursue it. I've heard about this for 12 years back when Laura was running Planning Commission. We heard about it every meeting, so I'm all for it.
But Doug, is it, if we put it in 2024, it actually is an allocation, isn't it? I mean, that's what, we're going to approve the 2024 budget. No,
But it is an allocation.
It's an allocation, so, I mean, it
the same
actually
word.
is there, as opposed to our
It's
longer range financial
Sort
plans.
of earmarked.
And, I'm willing to, but I understand what you're saying, no problem, things get pushed, they get pushed all the time. There's just, I can't imagine that we would do it without going for a vote. I can't imagine that we do that.
Well, let me ask you this. If the plan is to put 70-foot towers at our 3 city-owned parks, that's currently allowed within our code. We don't need to go to our citizens for a thing.
don't need
Is it the right thing to do? Maybe by way of an open house or a meeting or a survey, but I'm not sure it's a vote of the people.
Oh, well,
to do something that's within our code.
Then I'd say this, Dan, and you're right, you were there, and the point is, and so when 200 people are sitting here saying, don't do it, and there's 5 saying, do it, hey, I know what council did the last time on that. They cut and run. I cut with them. But I think we do it again. We need the people to say.
Let me do this, though. Let's,
we're doing this.
and we will have to have that discussion. I think there are differing opinions about whether we need to do that. But this specifically as it relates to the budget, and so that question relates to the budget in the sense that whether we would budget in 2024 or 2025, what we think an appropriate amount of time to get public input is, regardless of what mechanism you feel would be necessary. And I guess I would say that the one potential downside of budgeting for it in any given year, and the reason to try to be as accurate as possible, is because we develop a balanced budget. And so if there's a 2.5, this is a capital improvement project, but if there's a $2.5 million line item, then that's $2.5 million that we potentially wouldn't spend on something else.
It's in our reserves.
Right? And so that's, and I don't think it's an issue because we have sufficient reserves, but to answer the question of what the downside is, that's the smallest one. I know Rob hasn't, actually Rob hasn't said anything at all.
What a rare event.
Much to Susan and Dan's surprise, I seem to have developed a reputation that I think is undeserving, but nonetheless. I guess my comment is I don't mind allocation. I do think it's important to have that caveat that we had a number of people respond to a survey, and out of the 6,000 people, it's a paltry amount actually said this is a big problem. I think we know anecdotally it's bigger than that number. At the same time, so I guess my point is there is not, in my mind, an actual known dedication of that we should be going forward with this. I think I and a number of other people have expressed that I think this is, what are you going to get and what's the price, so that I know whether or not it's worth it to go forward, number one. And number two, and this information does a lot to help on that. And I'm glad that we have that amount in our reserves and we can do it. It's important for us to understand, though, that this is not and for our citizens to understand that this is not a traditional role for government to come in and fix this area. And if in fact we are going to dedicate a dime or a dollar, it is with the understanding that this is not a traditional function of government to come in and do this. We're lucky that we live in Cherry Hills and we can do this. But, you know, to the people who made the comment about safety, I did a little research. Every cell phone allows you to dial 911 even when you don't have service. So to the people who made the argument that it's a safety issue, it just, my understanding is it just isn't. To the people who are saying that increasing amounts of business is being transacted in Cherry Hills so that we need to have good cell service for those people, we can decide how much business as a village we want being conducted, because traditionally Cherry Hills has been a non-business community. It's been a bedroom community. Things are changing. I understand that. We might want to have cell to provide to those people as a business tool. But the idea that a child went out into the street and, you know, I made a unilateral decision to discontinue my landline so that I need a cell phone so that it saves me the 20 seconds to run in from the street or from the back trail or wherever it is, it's, you know, 5 minutes or whatever. I think that those are things that we have to realize are not traditional areas that we get involved with. So if we are going to spend $2.5 million, it's being done with the understanding that, you know, A, it's different, and B, there might be a decision that we ask our citizens to help pay for that, or a dedicated, it may not come strictly out of funds that we have. We might want to impose a fee or something like that.
Yeah, Randy?
Yeah, is there an amount of money that we might put in the 2024 budget that gives us, prevents, us a derailment of the process, that, and yet kind of recognizes that you can't snap your fingers and get towers put up right away, and there's permitting and all kinds of other things that could drag this out. I personally would like, again, kind of reflecting to try and get some higher level of accuracy or known, potentially known. I'd like to see the rest of it in the out years in the long range plan, but maybe there's some number like $500,000 prevents a derailleur of the train.
But there's the thing is, why don't you just you can do this too. Go ahead and put $2.5 million in the CIP and in the long-range financial plan. That doesn't get approved. That's not an allocation. We're just not going to put it in the 2024 budget right now. Because if it's in there, we've allocated it. It's the same thing as the roundabout. This council has allocated funds to be spent to put up those towers. Okay. I don't think we want to do that. I think we
okay,
want
so
to
you're suggesting there's a different reason. That's a different reason than you stated a moment ago, though. I think you're now saying the public perception problem is your concern now, and I agree that we want to make sure that the outreach happens.
Well, yeah, that's why I said, because I can't imagine that we do this without going to the public and getting, I'm sorry for I caused confusion.
Susan,
there.
did you have a thought?
Well, I think this discussion indicates that we're not all on the same page of what's going to happen and how it's going to happen. I like the idea of putting it in the CIP because there's something out there that's going to happen. We're just not sure when or how much it's going to be. But I think there's such a big difference down the panel as to what it's going to be that I'm not sure it does make sense putting it in the budget. But I think the CIP does reflect this is something that we think is coming along and it's going to be in there somewhere.
So
I guess
I agree.
the other thing that concerns me about it, Dan, is, if we look at even look at this year's budget, it's more than 10% of the budget, and it's a big number. And that's my concern, and I know we'll get there with the Quincy Farm number, is these are big numbers that we're talking about if you look at it as part of our budget, the percent of our budget. So I think we need to be really thoughtful about it. I'm not saying anybody's not being thoughtful.
No, but yeah. So with that in mind, and because I know we do still need to talk about Quincy Farm, I think what I have heard is that everybody is in agreement that there probably is some money being spent on this in our future. But maybe there seems to be a little bit more of a consensus for putting a number in 2024 that might reflect what we would need to do some form of community outreach, what we would need to finalize the plans and permits and something along those lines, and then perhaps putting the bulk of the actual construction costs. Because even if we were able to start construction at the end of 2024, at the fourth quarter 2024, that's still not going to be the full amount, or the majority of the money is going to come in 2025.
And I think council really does have a lot of tools in the toolbox there, because there could be another project that gets delayed again in 2024, and let's say you do want to start the cell project, then you could use those appropriations and not have to reappropriate. But you also could do a budget amendment in 2024.
So does anybody have, within the next minute, an idea that you would want, for a number that you would want to put in 2024 that perhaps is short of the full 2.5? Or do you want staff to give some consideration to what you think we realistically might need for this in 2024?
We can do that and bring it back with the first reading so
Yeah.
that there'll be a number in there.
Okay.
I'm going to say, at this point, what I'm hearing is that it should be around 500,000 or less, some number in there, and then try to figure out
And then like a 2 million somewhere later in the CIP?
and put it in a long-range CIP.
Yeah. Right. Okay. I think, is that everybody in general agreement with that?
Actually, I would actually suggest that we don't even put 500 in there. If we're not going to put, because 500 that's construction dollars. And if we're not going to really do this until a vote occurs, which would then trigger construction not to start till theoretically Q4, I don't think you're going to spend $1 on construction. I think you're going to spend, $10,000 or $50,000 on outreach.
But could there be like permitting and engineering and
That's
other
all
costs
in,
that-
that's all in the $2.5 million
Right, but I
number
mean-
right now. I don't think you need, well,
I'm thinking about preparing.
But our
for-
outreach could be, it could be a special election, it could be a extreme survey, it could be lots of
I think
things,
we're
so I
making a
don't know.
mistake
but
not
yeah.
putting the whole thing in there, but I also remember what happened in 2017. So I'm trying to balance that, and, but I think we're all, I would have thought we all had our finger on the pulse back in 2017. I think I've got my finger on the pulse. I think we all know our citizens want this. I think there are going to be a radius of people around the location of wherever these towers go that are not going to want it.
Right.
I wouldn't want it in my backyard.
Right. And then it'll be important that.
But the room is going to be stacked with the 200 people are going to be in favor of it with the 5 people that are against it, I think, as opposed to what you suggested.
They got to get out there.
So we have less than 10 minutes left in our budget discussion. So
Okay.
I think, yeah, okay, so,
Sorry,
well,
I
let's do Quincy Farm, because I think that's a big one. I think Randy raised a point that perhaps there do need to be other numbers in here, but Susan, you mentioned a comment, do you want to start us?
Well, I'm a big supporter of Quincy Farm. I want to start with that. But I am alarmed at spending what looks like the city share $825,000 out at Quincy Farm. And granted, not a lot is, I guess that's not fair to say either. We have spent money in the past. I assume, this is the first time I've gone through this process, the fact that we're approving the budget doesn't mean we're approving these projects, right?
I think
All contracts, yes, all contracts would come back to council, so I know
The
there's,
difference between a
We are
contract and approving spending $650,000 on the barn. And I guess I would want to see more information on why that's all being done this year. And I'm a big supporter of the farm, but it's just a lot of money that seemed to come up rather suddenly. And so I guess I would just want more information.
So one thing I'll just note about the process, since we do have some new council members, this is the study session, and then there will be 2 readings of the budget, at which point changes can be made, and 2 separate votes. And between this study session and the time where we have readings on the budget, we will have another discussion about the annual plan for Quincy Farm that might change, one way or another. So there's that to consider.
Well,
Rob, did
and
you
I
have-
just want to jump in, because I kind of anticipated, and as the liaison, I met with Emily and Jay, and a lot of our numbers, Public Works has a high increase. The Parks program has a high increase compared to this year's to go to next year's, in large part because of Quincy Farm. But the bottom line on Quincy Farm is there's lots of things we've been talking about on Quincy Farm for a long time. That this is kind of it's all come and due. While we had incredibly low capital expenditure costs, we had high maintenance costs. This is finally where you either go or don't go on a barn. And a barn's it ain't cheap. And so this is kind of what we always expected, and we're finally putting it in there. Knowing that it's a big hit on a lot of the capital costs that are in the parks budget in general.
And I would just say,
take it
too,
away
just
and
to
top it up.
clarify that there's 2 items under the parks projects. The Quincy Farm Pond, which is the dredging of the pond, which we would do outside of collaboration with the Cherry Hills Land Preserve, as well as the bridge, which needs to be repaired. And those 2 projects are separate, so we'd be looking at 175, and we can certainly discuss the barn at the next meeting.
Well, and there's a part of me too that I realize it's an increase, but it's kind of an increase over deferred maintenance. Year after year after year, we've kind of taken a pass on investing in Quincy Farm. If I step back and I say to myself, that property is a $17-20 million piece of property that we had the good fortune to be given, there's going to be some maintenance. Just like I had palpitations when I found out about my roof, but at the same time, it's like, okay, that stuff happens. And I'm not suggesting to be cavalier, but I think part of it is context. We just haven't put the money into the place. And, and it seems like it's time we start to, feels to me anyway, like it's time we start to start to fix the place up if we're going to continue to own it. And I think that's the will of we expressed before.
Earl?
And the thrust is that these numbers have been around for a while. They've really started to become crystallized lately, but they have been floating around out there for a while. It's just that, but you're right, but they've just only become crystallized recently. But one thing while we're on Quincy Farms that I was curious about is that because you've got those capital costs in there, you got the pond, you got the barn, you got the bridge, and then you got $35,000 for for general maintenance, 16 utilities, 25, and $122,000 for project expenditures identified in the 2024 Quincy Farm Annual Plan. What the hell is that?
I think that's,
What is that?
Some of that,
I mean, the
sorry.
city's share is $122,000?
Yes, but some of that is maintenance. So I apologize. That identifier on the spreadsheet is maybe not accurate because 50,000 of that is just maintenance. It's not actually projects from the annual plan.
So it's maintenance, that's not general maintenance.
Correct.
What page are you on, Earl?
yeah,
What page are you on?
This was on page little v, little 415.
So the projects that are identified in the annual plan include $12,000 for redoing the gravel driveway following the big barn construction, $10,000 for signage, $10,000 for east side pasture reseeding or amendment, which is a project identified in the annual plan, but is really maintenance. $50,000 of that 122 on this slide is also just general maintenance. That's maintenance that we're considering contracting out rather than having park staff complete certain tasks. And then $10,000
Oh, now I know what that is.
yeah.
That's the-
$10,000
that's the-
is nature trail.
I call that the, if you're listening, I call that the Linda Bear number. That's the,
Yes.
we don't have time, we'll contract it out and we'll have it done. That's the, okay.
Yes.
I got that, okay.
Yeah.
That's, I understand.
Yeah, so the annual plan projects, as identified up there, are some projects and some maintenance. And I will say at the November 7th council meeting, we'll have the opportunity to hear from the Land Preserve and hear really more context about the budget, including how this all fits into the vision for the farm going forward, and just more detail about the big barn.
Okay.
And I think the one thought I have about any numbers that we put in there, where I struggle still is with the uncertainty around what the future uses of that would be. I just still am I need a comfort level that we'll be able to, the citizens of Cherry Hills Village will reap the benefits of these investments before I feel comfortable committing that money. But I do think that perhaps a more in-depth discussion will be better suited after we've had that presentation at the November 7th meeting. I do, however, though, I think
Let me
Randy.
just, can I just one
Yeah,
thing?
yeah, go
on
for
that,
it.
Just because I know we're out of time. But on Little Roman 4, the previous page, it says park projects, Quincy Farm Barn and Pond, at a 50% share with the Parks Fund. And it's under capital fund, and I don't understand that. Why isn't it? And I think what you're saying, this is on Little Roman 4, okay?
In the binder. This
in the
was in
binder.
the original.
Yes, that's changed. That was for the stormwater. So some of that stormwater in the canal, I have a hard time relating to parks and trails. That's infrastructure coming off our
Okay, no, but it
streets.
does, okay, it doesn't say.
But that changed.
changed.
Because that's all being paid for out of ARPA now.
In this Roman 5, oh, it's not in there, in the packet version.
But that was stormwater projects specifically.
Okay.
And that was moved from the general fund and Parks and Rec fund to the ARPA fund.
Okay, but everything that, again, legitimately can be paid for by parks and considered parks, trails, and recreation.
Correct.
Is paid.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, well, so we are out of time. If you have more questions, like I said, we will have 2 readings of the budget in the future, and there's still opportunities to make changes. If there are things that you need more information on, feel free to work with Director Farman offline and get your questions answered. With that, it is 6:30, and I will call to order the regular meeting of the City Council. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Counselor Eber?
Here.
Counselor Holen?
Here.
Counselor Wheel?
Happy to be here.
Counselor Sheldon?
Here.
Counselor Blum? Here. Counselor McGuire?
Here.
Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Before we proceed with our agenda, I wanted to take a moment of personal privilege to share our grief for the loss of innocent lives as a result of the brutal terrorist attack on Israel over the weekend. I know it's been weighing very heavily in the hearts and minds of our community. Unfortunately, this appears to be the next maybe bloody chapter of what is already a very long and tragic tale. And I know that there's a lot of effort going on with our federal government and on the global scale. But here in Cherry Hills Village, I wanted to take the opportunity to express our prayers and support for the Jewish members of our community, and I guess, in fact, anyone in our community who has friends, family, or ties to the area. know that we are standing with you and in support of you during this very, very difficult time.
Thank you, Katie.
Yes, thank you, Al. With that being said, I would like to open it up to, I'd like to make one change to the agenda. I'd like to remove item 9A because in discussions with staff, we don't feel that will be necessary any longer. And then moving on to audience participation. I would like to invite Mark Griffin to speak, and then Clerk Gillespie. I know there are other members of the audience who wish to speak and probably didn't have the opportunity to sign up. So, Mr. Griffin.
Thank you, Ms. Mayor. I'd like to include my wife, Jan Griffin. Live at 3236 Cherry Ridge Road, Cherry Hills Village, Colorado. Mayor Brown, council, and staff, I'd like to report to you on the second annual Cherry Hills Village Police Foundation Car Show. We had a wonderful turnout, close to 60 cars, everything from a 1929 Packard to a brand new Ferrari and anything in between. Dr. Ted Parks, my personal orthopedic surgeon, and his fabulous band, the Busted Bones, that's kind of hard to say, entertained with a rockabilly music on whatever their deal is, rockabilly. This year, we also had a silent auction in the city center. It was an interesting auction with many items ranging from a helicopter tour of the Front Range, Bronco tickets, jewelry, and furs. There's no way to quantify the attendees, but the parking lot was full of people, including our own mayor, Katie Brown, Councilman Randy, who brought one of his cars, and Al Bloom. And I don't know whether any of the other of you were there, but if we missed you, I'm sorry. I want to give special thanks to Chief Jason Lyons, Commander Brennan Leininger, Sergeant Noah Rolfing, and Nikki Troncoso. Also to Public Works for their support in helping us set up. I believe you and Ryan were involved there. Most of all, I'd like to give thanks to Laura Gillespie, this young lady over here, for working with all the minutiae and details and enduring my endless requests. That amount, the bills are still coming in, but we're going to raise over $14,000 for the foundation. Wow. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that update. Next, oh yeah. Oh, Mark, which car won the best in show?
Which car won the best?
Jeff Puckett, many of you know Jeff, brought his 1955 Mercedes-Benz 300 SL Roadster, a very rare car, worth somewhere between $1 million to $2 million.
Wow.
Anyway, any other questions?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, next on the list is Vicki Thompson. So when you come up, just please state your name and address for the record, and then, yeah, thanks.
Okay, Vicki Thompson, 3 Wynwood Drive. Okay, so Wynwood Drive is I don't know if any of you know, but it's just 4 homes on a very narrow road off of Franklin, ending in a cul-de-sac. For years, there have been several construction projects on the opposite side of Franklin. Their workers continually park on our side of the street right up to the edge of Wynwood. And this creates an extremely hazardous condition for those of us living down at the end of the cul-de-sac. There's a real chance every time we leave that we can hit someone or be hit. And that's a big problem because you have to get your car out to where you can see. Okay. Code enforcement has told us that the ordinance states that parking has to be adjacent to the property being worked on, but the adjacent homeowners have planted grass up to the street so no one will park there. Code enforcement has moved the parking to our side of the street, and that puts us in danger. They say to call them when we have a problem, and they do respond, but who can sit and wait when you have to get to a doctor or to my 97-year-old mother who needs me, or anywhere, actually? As soon as code enforcement leaves, the trucks come back. I've actually gotten out of the car and asked them nicely to please move away from the street, giving us some view, and they walk away, or they tell me to F myself, which has happened. They don't worry about tickets, they just pass them along to the homeowner. The situation actually got so bad last week that the code enforcement gentleman called the contractor and asked him to put up no parking signs, which he did. And ironically, last week after I met with Katie Brown, when I arrived home, there was a truck across Wynwood to allow a crane being moved into that same project that's been going on for 3 years. So now the problem at hand. Our neighbors at 2 Wynwood have sold their home, which will be demolished and a new home built. We are thrilled, but we have a lot of questions about how this will impact current residents. And despite speaking to some city representatives, we haven't felt our concerns have been considered. We've gotten a lot of "we hear you, but," and "we're sorry," and also "please call when there's a specific issue and we'll deal with it." But we need some proactive solutions, not reactive ones, when we are in a dangerous situation or unable to get our services. The plan is supposedly to have the workers park on the property, but our experience is they do what they please. Wynwood is a city street and parking is allowed. We've asked that they enter the property off of Franklin, but they don't want to disturb their hedge. There's a gate just east of Franklin, but they haven't agreed to access that either. I was told that Chalet is the builder, and I called to see if we could proactively address some of these issues, but they hadn't signed the contract yet. But he did arrange to turn the gas off on the property, which caused us to be blocked in for 2 days. Our recycling was not taken care of. Our mail was not delivered. We know that the only people there every day are the actual workers, not the contractor, not the owner, and the workers don't know or don't care. Wynwood is extremely narrow, with only one way in and one way out. We at the end of the cul-de-sac have very limited on-property parking and no on-street parking other than the cul-de-sac, and up Wynwood for larger vehicles. And we all cooperate well in sharing this area. Wynwood must remain open at all times to accommodate our trash, recycling, deliveries, mail, snow removal, guests, workers, and emergency vehicles. We rely on these for our lifestyles and for our lives. We're not spring chickens down there. Preventing our access, well, it's true. Okay, preventing our access and egress is not acceptable. Michael from Chalet Homes even told me that they will be storing the materials on the property. But when they do that, we will be blocked. So we believe that the city has a responsibility, and I'm speaking for all the neighbors, they just couldn't all come, has a responsibility to let us be able to safely access our homes, leave when we need to, and get the services we need. The city needs to be flexible to respond to this particular unique situation with creative measures. I'm almost done. I know it says 0, but I'm almost done.
That's okay.
We need a clear understanding of the rules and how we can get them enforced. Maybe the city can provide us with some signs so that it's clearly marked where people can and cannot park. Our road is only 15 feet wide. We have measured it, and 16 feet at the most. Can a fire truck or an ambulance get through if construction vehicles are parked along the road? Perhaps there needs to be a construction foreman on site with an available phone number to make sure that vehicles are parked, and if we have a problem, they would be able to quickly fix it. Maybe the city can use permits to help us if we have enough problems. Maybe a few days of a permit being revoked would get their attention. So we hope that you will hear our frustrations and work with us to help solve these problems in a proactive way that allows our neighbor to build their home and also to make sure that we are not endangered or our lives unduly disturbed. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. So I did meet with Ms. Thompson last week, and I conveyed our conversation to our city manager, Mr. Thorson, who did, by the way, go out and take a look at Wynwood and Franklin, and has said to make sure to pass along his contact information to you. So if you need help, but I appreciate your suggestions of some sort of proactive solutions. So thank you. There are no other audience participation. Are there any reports from members of city boards and commissions? Seeing none, we move to item 6, the consent agenda.
Mayor, if I may, I'd like to have both A and B removed from the consent agenda.
Okay, so that there is no consent agenda now. So then item 6A, Mr. Councilman Blum.
I was not at the attendant of the meeting, so the minutes can be approved without my approval.
Oh, you were already on.
Okay. Move to approve the minutes with the edit for Al's attendance.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Abstain.
Thank you. Item 6B.
Mayor, I have a number of questions as it relates to this, and I've talked to Doug and also talked to Earl about this and tried to understand it. My problem is trying to vote in favor of this is that I do not understand the consequences. And I asked Doug for some information today, and we got responsibility not only to the city, but also to our citizens. And Doug has given me some information showing that next year, if somebody had $1 million house, their average property taxes, if this passes, would go down somewhere between $650 and $1,000. That's on $1 million house, of which I don't know if there are any in Cherry Hills. And the other thing is, if somebody's looking at this, and I've got to answer, I think we all have to answer to our constituents, I guess the Tabor refunds are going to go away, basically, over a period of time under the HH. And if somebody has an income greater than $99,000, which in our neighborhood would think would be everyone, the Tabor refunds decrease anyway. So trying to understand this, and I'm open to some suggestions, it seems to me that if I was dealing with a constituent, they may say, look, I can save X amount of dollars if this thing passes. However, the city is taking the position on behalf of the city, and I understand the consequences if this thing will go away. The question I've got, Doug, is I think you showed in the budget that for fiscal year 2024, if this thing passes, we could lose up to $183,000. And is that consistent with going forward? Because Earl always asks on the long-range plan that we'd lose $183,000 each year for the next 10 years, and that's my question for you.
Yes, it's going to vary a little bit because of the way HH is structured, because I think the actual value reduction goes to 40,000, and then eventually the residential assessment rate changes. But yes, those assumptions that HH is approved are in the budget.
So my question is, in dealing with constituents, they may feel totally different than what this council would do if we go forward with this resolution. So I'm open to suggestions on that. I've got a problem, and I'm trying to understand this, spending the day talking to Doug and Earl about this, as to what effect it has if we go ahead with this vote. So I raised that issue and like to hear from fellow council members on that.
And I guess the only comment I have is, I thought at the last meeting, and maybe I misunderstood what we did, but I thought we were not going to go forward, that the directive was that we were not going to take a position on HH.
No, it was that we were going to.
With that said, I guess my question is, HH is highly controversial, and I'm not really, I think with 213, we could say as a council with great confidence that it was adverse for everybody in Cherry Hills Village. I'm not sure that all of Cherry Hills Village can say the same thing about HH, or that we can say that on behalf of HH, on behalf of the whole village. So, you know, this one's a little tough, much tougher than it was for 213 to make a resolution. You know, I'm not sure enough that we fully understand it was introduced at the end. It's been pretty quiet in terms of what it does and doesn't do, and it seems to be quite controversial of what it does and doesn't do, to the point that I'm not sure this is the right resolution for us to be taking.
Counselor Holen.
Well, and I guess, and I wanted to take a position against it, but not for the reasons that are in here. I wanted to take, and I guess this was, I looked it up, I guess this was the CML recommended resolution. I mean, to me, it's unbelievably complicated, but it's an end around Tabor, okay? And it's basically telling the public and telling them, saying, hey, we're going to give you tax relief. By the way we're going to pay for it is we're going to take it from your Tabor refunds, and we're just going to income redistribution. This is a lousy proposition, and personally, I'm against it. I agree at the end of the day, is that a position that council should take? I'd have no problem taking a position that said that, but this is, I don't even know that it's worth doing.
Okay. Councilman Wheel?
I have the same feelings, that it's kind of a sleight of hand, and that people would be better off with the Tabor refund, but it's positioned in the language of the ballot language as a tax reduction. And I think you're right, it's an end around Tabor, and I think there are provisions also that start to monkey with what the state keeps versus what the municipality would get under normal circumstances, which is adverse as well. So I can get behind not or opposing HH as well. The CML has a lot of credibility with me, and I know their people also have researched this, and they've taken a pretty strong opposed position. Okay.
So yeah, I would add to CML has opposed this, and the primary reason, well, it's kind of outlined here, and they sent out a document primer about their explanation of Prop HH and their reasoning behind it. But I guess I would boil the main reason down to the fact that property taxes fund local governments and special districts, and Tabor income taxes fund state government. And Prop HH basically takes from property taxes and gives it to Tabor. So they're basically taking local tax dollars and giving them to the state. Part of the objection to HH is, I think everybody agrees that property tax relief is probably in order, that the increases across the state are astronomical, and I think I probably haven't talked with everyone on council with this, but I'm not going out on a limb by saying we don't need a 30% increase in our budget, but property tax relief could be given with no strings attached. And there's frankly nothing preventing, if the state doesn't act, there's nothing really preventing the city from acting in its own way to address property tax relief without, having your cake and eating it too, I guess, is the way to think of that. The Tabor numbers that, Councilor Blum, that you're referencing are based upon legislation that the state legislature has made every year to override the way Tabor refunds are calculated in statute or in the Constitution. Tabor, or I guess it would be statute. Tabor refunds are supposed to be given in proportion to the amount of taxes you paid. So people who pay higher income taxes are supposed to get larger refunds, et cetera, et cetera. But the state legislature has in previous years determined that lower income and therefore lower income taxpayers need more tax relief than higher income taxpayers. And so they have changed that model, and that's part of the reason that it is true that Cherry Hills Village families have received negligible Tabor refunds in previous years. That's not to presume that that would always be the case. That's legislation that passes every year. And so there, Tabor refunds could at some point in the future go back to the way they're defined in statute. We don't know and can't plan for that. Prop HH does provide some, it says it provides some backfill of the local tax dollars that are lost, but without going into a very complicated description, not for Cherry Hills Village. We are not in the size and income bracket of a community to receive a full backfill of our tax loss, which is why Director Farman estimated that we would see a decrease of about $183,000. That's not an enormous amount of money for our city one way or the other. It's not going to break our budget either way, so it's not about that necessarily. And so I guess I could see either way. I personally am opposed to Prop HH. I would be supportive of this resolution, but I think that Councilman Eber makes a great point, and Councilor Blum, that perhaps some residents of our village might be better off under Prop HH.
Well, I'm also saying not only would some be better, but my beef with HH, in addition to everything that's been said, personally, is that it's offensive to me the way it was introduced. It was offensive to me that this legislature said, this is your fix. We're going to vote on it later. I can come up with a whole bunch of other reasons to oppose HH than what we've mentioned, the least of which is, let's tell the legislature to go back and actually do their job. So, for all of the reasons that I think we could ask for better product, I think that that's to me the problem with HH and the resolution is that I just don't know that this is something that we are so clear on that the opposition is the way to solve this, that we should have this resolution, I guess.
So
I'd like to do a resolution about the first 5 sentences that you said when you just went through the first 5 sentences that you said was the perfect resolution. You probably don't remember what they were, but
well,
it sounded
we
really
didn't
good.
write that, and this election will be over before the next time. But yeah, so ultimately, I think, Randy, you actually did just make a comment that, yes, there are some individuals of Cherry Hills Village who may be better off, or who may feel that this is something they support because of their personal financial situation. But the city will be worse off as a result. And so as not devastatingly so, but a loss of $183,000 in revenue this coming year, and then who knows what potentially as we move forward. I think that is why, as a city council resolution, I would suggest that we could oppose Prop HH, but that's why it's up for a vote. Other thoughts from this side of the table? Anybody?
Well, I agree with what Rob said. It's not a solution. They screwed this up at the legislature, and this is not a fix. It's got to be thrown back to them to try and solve the problem. But to tell our people live next door to me that say, look, I could save, based on what Doug has given me, $3,000 on my taxes, and I won't get a Tabor refund anyway because I'm making more than whatever the number is. It's hard to say, well, we as a city said you got to do this. And that's my objection. And I don't know what the CML thing said. Was it substantially different than this one? I don't know.
This is their model resolution.
This was
yeah.
So I just have a difficulty supporting it. If council wants to do it, I may just abstain, but that's my personal opinion.
I appreciate it, yeah.
Well, I for one am not in favor of HH, and I think you guys have adequately described the reasons why. how we move this forward, I might suggest we don't take any action on this measure at all. Provide no guidance to our citizens, provide no recommendation to our citizens. If we think that there's a bit of a split amongst our council and there's a bit of a split amongst our community, I'm not sure taking a position on it is the right way to go then. We have stayed away from taking positions on stuff that we thought the past might be not straight down the fairway that we knew the answer.
Well, I don't know that there's a split on council, although I haven't heard what Susan said, because everybody here said, we don't like it. I didn't like the resolution. I would have wanted something stronger. But at the end of the day, if that's the best we can do, I'd do it. I mean, I'd go with the resolution.
And while there may be, you're never going to get unanimity. So while there may be some people who might support HH, they certainly can do that at the ballot box. But from a city perspective, if we're losing over $100,000 as a result of it, feels to me like that alone is a compelling reason to support it, aside from, all the rest of the issues. I can get behind making a resolution. It's actually closer to 200.
I think, it does remind me a little bit of 213 in the sense that you made an interesting comparison, Rob, and the way that Prop HH reminds me of 213 is the, taking from the local government pocket and giving to the state pocket. That seemed to be the theme of this past legislative session. And I think that we just have to be very diligent about our role, the role that local government plays.
I have no problem. I probably would vote against it, but my problem is thrusting this on our citizens that may feel totally differently. Because some of us may get questions about this. There's a resolution saying I should do this. Why should I do it if X, Y, and Z? And that's my concern with going forth with a resolution for the city.
Susan?
I don't like it philosophically, and I'm comfortable voting on it based on the negative impact on the city and on the philosophy of, what local government controls and what state government controls and how those are funded. So I'm comfortable with it. This isn't how I would have liked to have seen the resolution worded, I guess.
But just to make it clear, though, the resolution isn't a position that the city of Cherry Hills is taking. The resolution is by the city council that is urging a vote to its citizens and everybody else to vote no. It's not saying the city of Cherry Hills does something. And I think that's an important distinction. And I think we as a council have a right to sit back and urge our citizens and anybody else to do something or not do something.
City Attorney, did you have something? Oh, okay. Okay, so I think, is there any other discussion? It sounds like we maybe have a consensus building, and so before I call for the vote, I do just want to say thank you, Councilor Blum, for bringing it up and for expressing your opinion, and obviously we'll encourage everyone to vote your conscience and the outcome be what it may. So with that, I would entertain a motion.
And we are voting to vote no, or to recommend,
Yes.
To approve the resolution, which
CML's
Opposes.
opposing. Okay.
I move to approve Resolution 36, Series 2023, opposing Proposition HH.
Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed?
Aye.
Nay.
So 2 opposed, 4 in favor. So that motion passes. Thank you all very much.
I like it, a split vote. I think it's important that organizations
Everybody
have
take
those
note.
times.
It's a rare
It does
event.
happen. And thank you for the very meaningful discussion. And gosh, I wish it could be like that more often. All right, 8A, Resolution 29, Series 2023, amending the city's traffic calming policy. Director Goldie.
Good evening, Mayor, members of council. Before you tonight is Resolution 29, Series 2023, the traffic calming policy update for the city of Cherry Hills. Again, we are trying to come up with a policy that is best for our residents and to provide a consistent procedure for addressing neighborhood traffic concerns. We've had some great discussion. We've had 4 meetings on this. This will be our 4th. We had a study session in June and then twice in July and September. Council had good discussions with staff and amongst themselves on improving this policy. Staff has gone through again with all of the recommendations from the September meeting and made those changes to the policy. And those changes include clarification that this is a citizen-initiated process, and the city may initiate traffic calming outside of this policy if necessary. It doesn't mean we won't go through a public process, but we just wanted to make it clear that this policy is a process for our citizens to bring traffic calming issues forward. We removed any impact area requirements that included HOA activity, or HOAs that are active in its entirety. We will be in touch with those HOAs when we do get these recommendations or requests, excuse me. So they will be invited to any of the meetings, but they will not have a vote as an HOA, and there will be no requirement that the entire HOA is the impact area. And we also changed, once we do determine there is a speeding problem, we change that process to a city process. So the city will set up those meetings, initiate those meetings, coordinate all of that. Again, we will talk to the HOAs if there is an HOA in the area and invite them to the meeting. But we take that onus off of the residents and make it the city's process from that point forward. So then the warrants were changed and clarified. The traffic volumes, it wasn't written very clear, so it now states that residential streets must have a minimum of 200 vehicles per day to be eligible for traffic calming based on speed alone. But if there is less than 200 but more than 100, the roads can still be eligible based on traffic accident data, not speeding data. And one other clarification was put in there that the warrant, on the warrants, and explains what the 85th percentile is, that it's not a city requirement, that that's the national standard. That is all of staff's presentation. I can answer any questions if there are any.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your continual work on this policy. I feel like we're really narrowing in. It's a lot of time and effort has gone into it over the years. So are there any other further comments or discussion?
I just have one quick question. Did we ever contemplate, and maybe I missed it, but did we ever contemplate what happens if there's a road that has less than 100 vehicle trips a day?
Well, based on all of the data and engineering studies, traffic calming is not very effective on roads that have less than 100 vehicles. It's really 200 is the optimal number. That's why we did the 200 for speeding. But if it's less than 100, it seems that it's easier to find who's doing the speeding in those areas because the vehicles are so limited so if there's less than 100, we will stay with our education and enforcement and try to figure out who's really doing that speeding.
A typical house generates 10 trips a day?
10 trips a day is the national average.
So if you had 9 houses down a road, which we have plenty of those small little streets in our village, 4 houses, Wynwood Drive, one of them, right, something like that, and you have people smoking down that road, I guess I agree with you. You're going to figure out who the culprit is pretty quickly.
Wynwood's pretty short.
Pretty short.
If you could get up to 40 on that, I'd be impressed.
All right. Well, I was just curious if there was a process for that road that has very few houses on it. But I guess that is the process. We count on the
Yeah.
police department to handle it.
Yes.
Okay.
I just wanted to say thank you for going through the process, and I think the change to add the city to take over once a demonstrated problem has been shown. I think it puts the onus on the right place, and the concerns that I raised in prior meetings, I think it's a really good solution. So thank you.
I think you did a good job doing it as well. My only comment or possible change if we approve it is, so is this now called the Citizen-Initiated Traffic Calming Policy, or is it still the Neighborhood Traffic Calming Policy? I just suggest that those things are made consistent throughout. You changed the title, which I think makes sense, but then you didn't through the rest of the body.
I would like to call it the Citizen-Initiated Traffic Calming Policy and make that consistent through.
Right, then.
Okay.
Okay.
So we can maybe make that as an amendment to the motion. Any other comments? Okay.
Okay, I move to approve Resolution 29, Series 2023, amending the traffic calming policy as presented by staff, finding that the new policy supports the safety and welfare of all people utilizing the city's public roads, outlining a clear process for mitigating documented traffic problems in an objective and fair manner, with the addition of renaming editing, substituting citizen-initiated traffic calming policy throughout the text.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? That passes unanimously.
Thank you.
Congratulations. All right, moving on to Council Bill 7, Series 2023, amending Chapter 4, Article 1 concerning the city's capital fund. Director Farman.
Thank you, Mayor. Let me get this set up here.
That's what happens when you have two highly educated staff people working on a presentation.
We'll get it.
Yep.
I don't know why.
I don't know why it went there. Is it?
No, that was budget.
All right. Sorry for the delay.
Thank you. Good evening again, Mayor and City Council. Tonight we do have an ordinance for consideration on second reading related to the city's capital fund. Just a very brief background. We do have a current capital fund in the municipal code that was created by Code Section 4150. There was a little bit of confusion over the years about the intent of the capital fund, and for auditing and financial reporting purposes, right now that capital fund is reported with the general fund. And Council has discussed this topic several times and also approved the first reading on September 19th. So tonight's ordinance accomplishes these three main objectives. This fund would be a tool for long-term financial forecasting. As we talked about earlier this evening with the budget discussion, it is very important in looking out in the future. We do have a 10-year capital fund long-range financial forecast that could be developed based on the capital improvement program and utilizing specific assumptions for capital assets that would be aside from operational forecasting. This fund would also be separately reported and audited, separate from the general fund. And lastly, a long-term forecast with the capital fund does improve communication to the community. Included in this redefinition, the fund major source for the capital improvement program would incorporate transfers from other funds, such as the general fund and the Parks and Recreation Fund, and also could include other revenues such as grants or other revenues. And the ordinance does stipulate that unexpended interfund transfers may be returned to the originating fund at council's direction. And we talked about this before. Right now in practice, any capital fund expenditure for parks is added up at the end of the year, and then one transfer is made from the Parks and Recreation Fund. So we would do that with the general fund as well, so there really wouldn't be any unexpended funds at the end of the year going forward. And then the ordinance also specifies and clarifies that these revenues will be spent on capital asset acquisition, construction, improvements, all in accordance with the city's capital improvement program policy. And that ends my presentation. Here's the recommended motion, but I could certainly answer any questions.
So don't forget to turn it back on. All right. Thank you very much for that presentation. Are there any questions for Director Farman, or we have already discussed this, so okay.
I move to approve Council Bill 7, Series 2023, a bill for an ordinance of the City of Cherry Hills Village amending Chapter 4, Article 1 concerning the city's capital fund on second and final reading.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Oh, sorry, you're right. Roll call. You even write it on there for me, and I just can't even manage to read it. All right.
Counselor Eber?
Aye.
Counselor Holen?
Aye.
Counselor Wheel?
Aye.
Counselor Sheldon?
Aye.
Counselor Blum?
Aye.
Counselor McGuire?
Aye.
That passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Moving on to new business, we've removed 9A, and we'll move on to item 9B, fence discussion. Director Workman, sorry. Oh, you're over there now. Oh, technology, always the bane of our existence.
Thank you for your patience.
Yeah, absolutely.
Good evening, Mayor Brown and members of council. This presentation and the associated materials in your packet are intended to help guide a follow-up discussion with council related to fences. As you all will recall, we had a study session in June of this year where council broadly discussed our current fencing requirements. During that study session, council primarily focused on the associated landscaping requirements that accompany the fencing standards in certain circumstances. Fencing located on properties between Colorado and Albion and north of Mansfield, excuse me, and the opacity requirements in the R1 zone district. Based on our discussion back in June, council again did not want to take a holistic, let's redo the fence ordinance approach. There were some strategic things that were identified during that conversation, and so we really are here to get your feedback on essentially three things related to that discussion from June. But certainly we can discuss more if that's the desire of council. What we really want to discuss this evening and get direction from you is that we're headed in the right direction with these proposed amendments so that we can then proceed through the normal process for code amendments with Planning and Zoning Commission and then 2 readings before you all. So in this presentation, you will see a change related to the removal of certain landscaping requirements for a certain type of fencing, a change related to the addition of properties to Area 6, and then just wanted to get kind of a thumbs up or a run through with council related to some of the images that were proposed. So this is Table 16-3-120. I've highlighted the sections that were proposed for changes in your packet materials. The first one at the top left, that cloud indicates a reference to the two new diagrams that were shown to help provide additional clarity about the different areas of the lot as specifically outlined in the fencing standards. Area 6 was expanded. Currently, Area 6 applies to fences that are installed on properties that are adjacent to South Clarkson or East Happy Canyon. Based on the discussion with council, this was expanded to include those handful of lots that are north of Mansfield and between Colorado Boulevard and Albion Street. And then it is difficult to see, but the cloud below that is a removal of the reference to number 4, which is the associated landscaping requirements for fences in that Area 6. So that would be the landscape requirements that council discussed specifically related to Happy Canyon and the concern that those landscaping requirements were actually hindering the replacement of fences in those areas. So those are the strategic proposed amendments. Again, we're looking for your feedback if this is consistent with council's desire and council direction from the study session. And then we just have the images. These were provided in your packet. One image excuse me, would indicate the fencing areas for fences that are considered interior lots, i.e. have one street frontage, and then the other 3 sides are other developed properties. The second image would be related to properties that have a street frontage, but then also are adjacent to either Area 6, which is the Happy Canyon, East Clarkson, and those lots east of Colorado Boulevard, should council choose to do that. The Area 5, which is the state highways, and then properties that are adjacent to parks, trails, open space, those sorts of things. So that concludes my brief presentation. I will cycle back to the table, but really I would like to hear from council at this time. One, any questions you have related to it, and then any additions or further discussion related to the proposed changes.
So I have one quick technical question. If footnote 4 is removed from that Area 6 reference, I don't see anywhere else that it's referenced at all.
If you look up to Area 5 in the maximum opacity, there's a reference there to number 4.
There. Okay, great. Thank you.
So the landscaping would still apply to the state highways.
Looks like you have a typo there at the end of that. Area 5, LINIE.
Yes, that's correct. Thank you.
Okay.
That's the technical term?
Hey, Paul, can you just, in a minute or two, refresh my memory as to our discussion that we had last time we talked about this, about why we removed footnote 4 as it relates to Happy Canyon? We were worried that it was dissuading the homeowner from actually replacing the fence because they had what could be onerous landscape obligations?
Correct. So they would be required to have landscaping basically outside of their fence line and in front of, or behind, I guess, the actual right-of-way that is difficult to maintain, if maintained at all, and it was discouraging folks from making improvements or replacing the existing fence that was potentially dilapidated. So in actuality, the fence ordinance was sort of working against the upkeep.
And there were people who live like in the middle of the block who would have had to walk all the way down around on the outside to, yeah.
Well, and I think it was not only that reason, but I think I said during the meeting that back when I was on PTRC, the feeling was that certain of those external streets were probably not something that we meant to include those landscaping requirements on to start with. The very edge of Clarkson, the very east side along Happy Canyon. So I think that was part of the rationale that I used as far as it was never intended to apply to those along Happy Canyon. But
Makes sense. Thank you.
Paul, the one question I had for you is that in the change on the language for Area 6 there, I have a proposed change to that, because I think what we really were talking about is the houses, we were talking about Colorado Boulevard for those houses north of Mansfield and east of Colorado Boulevard.
Not the
And the
whole
way this comes across is that it could apply to the Albion side
The
as
whole,
well.
and the whole neighborhood that's north of Mansfield. We just.
Well, no,
we-
it still says west of Albion Street. I just think a way
Oh,
to,
yes, okay.
to clarify that even a little bit better is, because you list Clarkson, Happy Canyon, or Colorado Boulevard for those
North of
houses
Mansfield, yeah.
on the east side of Colorado Boulevard, north of Mansfield.
Yeah.
Just, because I think it is that we were making that change specifically to Colorado Boulevard and not to the other areas.
Okay. Appreciate that feedback. Thank you.
Otherwise, thank you.
No,
Yeah.
that's great.
And I think you
wanna-
probably could even, you could simplify it by saying Colorado Boulevard north of Mansfield, because on the west side of the street, those are the fronts of their houses. And you can't put a 6-foot fence in the front.
Correct.
When we talked about it, we talked specifically about saying the ones to the east because, I mean, well, I guess you could say
It's
they-
because
the
it's
ones
their
on the
back
west side
fence.
were R1, but they also had a trail on the
Yeah,
front.
they have a trail, and it's the front of their house, and you can't put a 6-foot fence
Right.
on the front anyway.
It's fine with
So-
me either way. I think you're right.
That's exactly right. We're just looking for feedback. And so if that's the feedback, I don't want to arbitrarily extend the
Yes.
discussion. I know you guys still have a exec session.
Yeah, I did get, in one of my Crier articles, I asked for people who had issues with fences. I got 3 responses. I think 2 of them, one of them will probably be helped by this. One of them will be neutral with these changes. And then the third one is really a unique circumstance and probably needs to go through the variance process. And they're under the impression that that's a very lengthy and expensive process. So but I don't know that we can change, it would be very difficult to make the code work for them. So.
Okay. Appreciate the discussion. Thank you all.
Real quick comment also that I'm going to wait, I'm going to come back to it during my report, but on page 4 or 5, when we talk about recreational enclosures, I just want to note that I now have a number of people coming to me about a batting cage that has cropped up in our neighborhood, and it is more than 10 feet probably in height. And so it brings up, since we're talking fences, it falls in the category, so I just want to mention it here.
Okay, interesting. Okay, moving on to reports. I will try to keep this quick. On October, I think it was 4th or 5th, I attended, Arapahoe County hosted a housing tour for our state legislators. There were about 6 state legislators there, including both Meg Froelich and Senator Bridges and several others. It was very well done. We met down near the, I guess is that like the Dry Creek Light Rail Station, and then drove around to several different sites. They put together this little booklet for the tour that I'll hand out. It has has some overview information about all the housing in Arapahoe County, how many households, poverty level, et cetera, what the mix of all housing in Arapahoe County is in terms of multifamily and size, et cetera. And then it has information about each of the locations that we visited. And so the net takeaway towards the end of the presentation, they asked the legislators as we're on the bus back to the parking lot if they had any thoughts they wanted to share. And it was encouraging that most of them expressed a sentiment along the lines of, we recognize the different layers that are required in these housing projects, from financing, local government, zoning, federal dollars, and that we recognize that it's an enormous, layered pie, and we really need to be working together. And I thought that was very encouraging. So we'll see how that plays out. But they also did a second, so this was the east side of the county, or the west side of the county tour, and then they did an east side of the county tour last week. I wasn't able to attend that one, but I assume it was just more, similar idea, but focused more on Aurora projects and things out west. We also had our Metro Mayor's Caucus meeting this past Wednesday. We have obviously a new mayor involved in that process, who spoke about the Denver's homeless initiatives. Everyone in that room was still very committed to the principles of home rule authority, moving forward with any housing proposals that might come forward in the future. Kevin Balmer from CML was there to speak about what he thinks the future might hold. So everybody's still on the same page with Metro Mayor's Caucus.
Hey, Katie, before you leave that whole thing, excuse me. Is anything going on with regard to, remember one of the big issues was that the legislature, the staffers were not meeting with people, were not working together with people. Is there any evidence that those types of meetings are taking place on a viable, legitimate basis?
I think that I would say tentatively yes, not overwhelmingly yes, but there are, CML I think has definitely stepped up their coalition. CML is planning on proposing legislation to at least, if nothing else, provide an alternative for legislators who want to do something but maybe don't want to go down this other road. DRCOG, I'm sure Randy can speak to that. They're putting together a very coordinated effort. CCI, Colorado Counties, is also doing the same thing. One thing to note, at the last meeting I mentioned that Megan McKillop from CML had left and was joining the lobbyist firm that we're working with. I have learned since then that actually 2 of the other lobbyists at CML are also moving on to other positions. And so that does raise a little bit of concern for me that CML has a very big, very important role to play in this process. And I hope that we have people who are willing or are able to effectively fulfill that role. But I'm sure they're doing their best with that.
Well, that actually seems like, something that the municipalities would talk to Kevin about and go, I'd sit there and go, dude, how are things, tell me, at least give me some,
Yes.
words
So
that things are going to be okay.
The first policy committee meeting is on Friday, and I will be attending that, and I will report back in November as to what the conversation is around that. For all we know, maybe they have a pinch hitter. Who knows? We'll see. Then, let's see, I attended the Dine for the High Line, which I know several other people were at. It was an absolutely lovely event, as usual. I also attended the Quincy Farm Equestrian event put on by the Cherry Hills Land Preserve. Very nice attendance. It was a beautiful day, a great presentation. And it really is so exciting to see people experiencing that property. Anybody who's new to it is just in awe of what a cool place it is. I did attend the car show, as former Councilmember Griffin said. It was a great event. They were really nervous. I guess at the beginning of the week, they only had about 20 cars, and they all came in at the last minute, and it was a great assortment. the auction was a nice addition. I bid on a series of 3 paintings of cherries, and I won that, and I plan to get those framed and donate them to our council office in the building here. So if you see them in there. And then the last thing I wanted to mention, I know Clerk Gillespie sent out the 2024 council meeting dates, and I was putting them all on my calendar, and I realized that February 20th is the Tuesday, the day of the retreat is scheduled, is the Tuesday after President's Day, and I will be flying back that morning. I will be here in time for the council meeting, but I will not be here in time for a daytime retreat. So if we can...
Yeah.
Chicago in February. Are you sure?
Well, perhaps
So-
we can push that back one meeting if everybody's okay with that. Certainly, it's important for the mayor to be there.
So thank you. I appreciate that. Okay, and that's it for me. So let's go. I don't remember where we started last time, but let's go down to Councilmember McGuire.
I have no report.
Thank you.
I have no report, but I do want to say I attended the car show. I think that was a great event. My 6-year-old grandson identified every car at the show except for the 1938 Packard. He didn't know what that was, but he knew the Ferraris and the everything else. Katie, I want to thank you for your words at the beginning of the meeting. I think that was very appropriate, and it'll be well received by everybody.
Quick update on security issues as it relates to the Charlevoix neighborhood. And Earl, you might be interested in this, and Commander, if you'll pass this on to Chief Lyons, I would appreciate it. Our neighborhood, the Charlevoix neighborhood, was hit real hard back in the early summer with the crime spree, and we did a vote amongst all the members of our community, about 100 homes. And we got the results back today on that, the official results. And out of the 81% voter turnout, what was at stake was, do you want to leave everything status quo and spend no money, no capital on investing in security on site? Would you like option 2, which would be 9 p.m. to 5 a.m., basically dusk to dawn security from an unarmed guard sitting in a car, maybe doing a loop through the neighborhood once or twice an hour, or whatever it may be? Or would you like full-time unarmed security 24/7? And the results came back, 60% of our community voted no, we want no changes at all. So it was interesting, and I bring it up because we all think or thought or still think today that we could always make improvements to our neighborhoods and help make them safer. And I actually thought this was going to pass in our neighborhood, and it got blown up. And I'm a little bit surprised, but I think what's happened since in the last, I don't know what it's been, 60 days now, where we have not seen that crime spree back in the village, or frankly anywhere, according to Chief Lyons, that those folks have been at bay, whether they've been caught or are kind of handcuffed, literally or figuratively. They haven't been out. I think maybe our neighborhood has a tiny bit of a sense of maybe false security, that things are calm and we're good and we don't need any further action. We'll see what the future brings, but I just wanted to give that report. I know Councilman Holland is looking at doing the same thing in his streets of his neighborhood as well. So that's all.
That is interesting. Thank you for that. Mayor Pro Tem Wheel.
Thank you. Let's see. I attended a meeting that was sponsored by CML and supported by Dr. Cog as well on the topic of housing. It actually was a pretty good meeting, and to your point, Earl, there was a representative from the governor's office there. That's the good news. The consultant was California-based, and it sounded like he was quite a player in California's laws around housing and trying to alleviate the housing shortage. There were a couple of headline items. The whole notion of missing middle seemed to be wrong, and they passed legislation that enabled that and got almost no takers. I mean, like double-digit housing units across the state of California. So he was backing off of that, and also kind of focused the presentation and his comments on a little different orientation, that what could happen and what in his opinion should happen is commercial corridors, that there are these streets where you have good public transportation and you have 1 or 2 story commercial buildings lining them, and if one went up, 4 or 5 stories, along those corridors, you could get plenty of housing to meet all of the shortfall needs. You could avoid the disruption and the kind of backlash that you get when you try to put an apartment building in the middle of residential areas. And you would benefit with good access to good transportation so that cars could come off the street, single occupancy vehicle trips could be reduced and the like. And then as he looked into the future, he could see the bus rapid transit and bus rapid transit versus train, because it's so much less expensive per mile to implement. And he could see that as he got the crystal ball out and looked forward, moving from traditional buses to perhaps autonomous vehicles and the like. But it was kind of good. It was a refreshing, much more focused, fact-based, analytical kind of a look at this than what we had perhaps seen in 213's rationale. That was the good news. The only piece of bad news was I heard Polis speak at an event about, it was maybe a week later, and he's back talking about duplexes and quads and things like that. So the trickle-up communication system hadn't quite reached him yet, but I do have hope that there is going to be more careful, thoughtful crafting of whatever comes come January. That's all I have.
Councilor Holland.
I don't really have anything. The main reason is because the last 2 weeks I've been was in Europe on a river cruise floating down the Danube, which is why I wasn't at some of these other functions. But I just wanted to pass on that, and we got the opportunity to Czech Republic, Germany, Austria, Slovakia, and Hungary. And I was really taken by the fact, and this is anecdotal, but I talked to a lot of natives. These people are very much in support of Ukraine. And they believe, like, the average guys, they believe that if Ukraine falls, if Putin succeeds, they're next, particularly the Czechs. I mean, the Ukraine flag is flying all over the Czech Republic, and they absolutely believe that they'll be next. And I just thought that was really, really interesting. In fact, one of the guides on a tour wanted to make sure I knew that the Czechs were spending twice what the United States was to support Ukraine on a per GDP basis. And I said, hey, good for you.
I thought you were going to maybe report that Earl, I thought you were maybe going to report that they all had cell coverage.
Hey, they all certainly have cell phones, that's for sure. But anyway, I just thought that was interesting. I thought I'd pass it on.
Councilor Eber.
I'd like to thank you for your personal privilege comments earlier on behalf of the state of Israel, country of Israel. We, a number of meetings ago, also passed a resolution regarding anti-Semitism, and the Cherry Creek School Board did have a meeting recently to specifically address anti-Semitism on campus. I know it's an ongoing issue that continues at the local level and continues to be addressed. So I think we were prescient in our resolution, and I think it is an issue that we need to continue monitoring. Equally close in this month's Village Crier, there is a short note about the passing of Heidi Hamill. We talked about this in our last meeting. The obituary got published. Her husband, Michael, saw me in the neighborhood earlier last week, wanted me to express to all of us, thank you very much for putting the obituary in the Village Crier. He did express to me again, although it's not in the Village Crier, he again expressed to me that she was in fact the author or the originator of the idea for the cherries. We would have put that in, but we just weren't able to verify that to the point that we wanted to publish it, and we didn't want it to detract from the otherwise perfectly good obituary. And third, as I mentioned already, I've had a number of neighbors come to me about a new entry in our neighborhood, and that is somebody installed a batting cage. It isn't so much an issue from the fencing that I mentioned, but I do think it brings up a question about the fencing. Earl just mentioned to me, isn't that an accessory dwelling unit? And the way the language of that section read, it talked about swimming pools and volleyball courts and stuff like that. I've already talked with Jan a couple times. I think Jan has already mentioned something to you, Paul, about it. But the issue is not so much the fencing. It's more a question about the noise. And it's not the pitching machine. That's just a it's the ping of a metal bat on a baseball that you can hear literally 4 or 5 blocks away. When I was walking, in fact, in front of your house, Mayor, I could hear it in front of your house.
Oh my God.
So it does travel distance. And so I'm not really sure, if this is treated like the periodic event of dog barking or, pardon me? Pickleball that we've already talked about, but I added to the list of things that I never thought we'd be dealing with in terms of noise issues. But I think we probably ought to address batting cages in Cherry Hills Village as part of our noise issues. So,
We've got one in Charlevoix that is up year round now as well.
Interesting. Well, okay, add that to the list. And then actually, I do have one other thing then. The air traffic noise has been incessant. And I did reach out to, because I know how to track the flights and things, it's actually mostly coming from DIA, mostly. So I did file noise complaints, and they replied and said that one of the runways has been closed for construction for a period of time, and it's supposed to be reopened by the end of October. So maybe there will be a little bit of relief, but it has gotten, in our neighborhood, it has gotten really bad.
And I just will add to that I asked Clerk Gillespie to coordinate again. I'm the representative to the Southeast
Centennial Airport Noise Roundtable.
And wasn't getting notifications, but now I am. The last meeting was just this last Tuesday night, and unfortunately I wasn't able to attend it. But I will be going to those and encourage everybody to continue bringing whatever issues they have to me so I can, start bringing them back. I too have noticed the same thing, that it seems like planes are coming straight up from the south, kind of in the central part of the village, and then making kind of a bank right-hand turn to the east and then going to DIA. And they're making that break to the east, what seems to be right over Hampton.
Yes.
And similarly, I've noticed an awful lot of small jet traffic being very noisy in the eastern part of the village too, which I think is coming out of Centennial. So
we're kind of getting the double whammy.
I do think I'm noticing an awful lot louder, lower aircraft than we used to.
Yes. All right. Thank you. We have an executive session for tonight.
Before
oh, sorry. Staff report. Sorry.
Don't forget us. First of all, I just want to say thank you to Doug. I mean, the budget is no small feat, and all of the staff that worked on this. It's a tremendous effort, always putting that together. All the council liaisons that helped out. It seems like these things go a lot smoother, but behind the scenes, there's a lot of chaos happening, and Doug's really good at putting it all together for us. So thank you to all of the staff and council for that. Two, what gives me a little bit of joy is one of the things that was approved, not approved, but discussed a little bit tonight was the COP funds. And when we, for those council members who were on council at this time, and even one in the audience, we went from a budget that we thought was going to be approved for a COPs, and it got cut $1 million at the council meeting that night. And not only did we meet the $1 million less budget, but we had $500,000 left over at the end of the day and completed all the projects. And that doesn't happen by accident. I mean, there's great leadership on the council, but you've got a great administrative staff to make sure these things happen. And so now we have the ability
There was a really good city manager back then, too.
Well, we have the ability to pay for 2 years of general fund for our annual costs. So,
And I'd also mention that we did cut $1 million out of that, and I voted for that, but I did say at the time that we regret that. And we'd certainly like to be earning our 5% on that now at this point, and paying 2 and whatever it is at that point in time.
So, and I will note, as part of that budget, we have an extremely aggressive CIP. It's one of the larger ones we've had in, I think, a couple of years for sure. So Jay's going to be busy on that. And I did speak with Ms. Thompson, gave her my information, and I've been out to that site 3 times already, and I've talked to Chief Lyons about it, and we'll be aggressive in addressing that. And we may actually put up some no parking signs to make sure the visual triangle is open and not blocked, and people can get in and out of there. So that's all I have.
You know, one of the things I was going to mention on that was that, you know, one of my pet peeves is this whole notion of people putting grass and things like there and making people think that they can only park on the street and they can't park in the city right away. And that's just wrong, and it's a problem. And if they would park in the right of way, they wouldn't have that problem.
Yes. Next, who's next? No, city attorney, nothing? Community Development Director?
No report this evening.
Clerk? Is it Emily? Yeah. Oh, okay.
She's down there somewhere.
Okay.
I have no report.
Good evening. I'll just take an opportunity to share. I know everybody is hopefully taking a look at our new website that has come out within the last month, specifically over the last couple of weeks. We've began publishing some regular tips, advice for our residents. For instance, we have Traffic Tip Tuesdays. We also publish our weekly blotter on Tuesdays, as well as other crime prevention tips. So just encourage everybody to continue going and signing up for the alerts on our new website, which is chvpd.com. And that's all.
Thank you.
Just real quick, I heard from the Department of Energy, the state finally moving forward on our grant for our electric vehicle charging. So hopefully here in the next few weeks, I can get all the equipment ordered and get that installed.
Thank you.
Terrific, terrific.
Just a quick note, on Proposition HH, one of the other things that it would change would be the county's deadline for certifying AVs, and that would be pushed out to December 29th. So the first reading of the council bill on mill levy will be in November, so you may see some creative language there because of those restrictions now.
Thank you. Okay, now we have an executive session.
Okay. I move to go into executive session pursuant to CRS sections 24-6-4024B and 24-6-4024E for the purpose of receiving legal advice on specific legal questions and determining positions relative to matters that may be subject to negotiations, developing strategies for negotiations and instructing negotiators regarding communications with Colorado Open Lands regarding the conservation easement on the property known as Quincy Farm. I further move to adjourn the city council meeting at the conclusion of the executive session.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Will the clerk please call the roll? Got it
Counselor
right.
Eber?
Aye.
Counselor Holen?
Aye.
Counselor Wheel?
Aye.
Counselor Sheldon?
Aye.
Counselor Blum?
Aye.
Counselor McGuire?
Aye.